Iran for the last 3 hours or so, but before that there was no let-up for more than 24 hours in the intensive bombardment by Israel and the United States, particularly by Israel, that has announced that it is expanding its goals, its targets here in Tehran. We have seen a difference in the nature of targets over the last 3 days. At the beginning, it was huge facilities, military facilities, government headquarters, but then we have 9 hospitals that have been attacked over the last 3 days, particularly since yesterday. More and more hospitals being struck, and also police stations that are located inside the residential areas, causing damage to civilians. We have some new statistics about the most prominent cases of civilians being killed. We have 47 people in Isfahan. We have 45 people in Kurdistan. We have 20 people in a section of Tehran. We have seen pictures of civilians killed in Tehran, or at least people claimed to be civilians. And we have seen cars destroyed and a lot of destruction inside the streets in residential areas. 175 schoolgirls killed in Minab, in Hormuzgan. So the authorities here are criticizing this development and saying that now it is the Iranian people that are bearing the brunt, the civilians bearing the brunt of this war. But at the same time, there are instructions from the president here, Pezeshkian, saying that the institutions, government institutions, are still intact, are still working, functioning, and are still helping people. He gave instructions that everything should be provided in terms of facilities, power, water, everything to the civilian population, and that the Iranians should be aware of what the government is capable of doing in protecting them and also in defending the country. There is a lot of reports from the military about this campaign that they have dubbed True Promise 4, and within that there are until now 12 waves of attacks across the region, including against tankers in the Gulf, particularly in the Hormuz Strait, and also against U.S. facilities and bases in Gulf countries. But we have an interesting line from a Tasnim news agency quoting a source in the government saying that Iran hasn't been behind the attack on Aramco and that it was perpetrated by Israel in order to stoke more fire in the region and create more chaos and more anger against Iran. And that they have also some intelligence reports talking about an imminent attack by the Israelis on the port of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, also for the same purpose. Iran has talked about using new generations of hypersonic ballistic heavy missiles against Israel and other targets. So that's within the framework of what they have been promising, that day by day the world will see more strength here in Iran and more resolve to attack and deal defeating blows to the enemies.
Mohammed, thank you for the update. That's Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val reporting from Tehran. An emergency meeting has been held at the International Atomic Energy Agency. It follows concerns over U.S. and Israeli actions towards Iran in recent days. The IAEA says nuclear facilities haven't been targeted in the same way they were last June. Bernard Smith reports from Vienna.
So Russia and Iran called for this emergency meeting of the IAEA because they want its board to address what they call the unprovoked acts of armed aggression by Israel and the US on Iran.
It is for the second time that they invade our countries during negotiations. Today, we are supposed to hold technical meetings here in Vienna. Based on such deceptions and unfounded allegations, they targeted our peaceful, safeguarded nuclear facilities.
The Iranians say that one of its facilities at Natanz has been targeted again, although the IAEA's Director General says he's seen no evidence that attacks on the scale of those last June have been carried out this time.
We haven't seen major military activity targeting the nuclear facilities. We have been looking at different satellite images. There might be something there, but not significant.
The IAEA says Iran has 4 declared uranium enrichment facilities, but it has lost continuity of knowledge about stockpiles. There's 440 kilos of enriched uranium at 60%. It takes just a small technical step to get it to 90% and weapons grade. The IAEA has no one on the ground in Iran. It needs to know where that uranium is. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Vienna.
Joining us now to discuss this from Washington is Alan Iyer, who is a distinguished diplomatic fellow at the Middle East Institute and a former senior diplomat on the U.S. negotiating team for the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, the JCPOA. Thank you for your time. Before this attack began on Saturday, there was cautious optimism that there could be a new deal with Iran. Do you think negotiations can ever resume on Iran's nuclear program, given what we've seen in these past 3 days?
Well, certainly not in the short term. I think that these military attacks have destroyed the possibility of negotiations resuming. But even before these attacks, the bottom line is that the two sides were not anywhere near reaching an agreement on the nuclear issue or other issues. The United States was demanding things from Iran that Iran was not willing to accept, and that's why negotiations eventually petered out.
But the Iranians had said that they were willing to freeze uranium enrichment. Why was that not sufficient for the Americans?
I think the American red line as regarding the nuclear program was Iran stopping enrichment, deconstructing its ability to enrich uranium. And for an indefinite amount of time, Iran was willing to suspend enriching uranium, but was unwilling to forfeit what it sees as its right to enrich uranium, and did not want to be dependent on other countries providing it uranium.
In the best case scenario, if negotiations were to resume, what kind of a deal could they come up with? One that is better than what was agreed in 2015. Can they ever do that?
Well, best case scenario by definition is they reach an agreement on the nuclear issue, on Iran's missile program, on Iran's support for proxies. These are all areas that the United States was insisting on at some point in the negotiations. That's not a realistic outcome. Best case at this point is that the hostilities stop as soon as possible, because already we're seeing, as your previous correspondents have noted, regional implications. But as it seems, it's more likely they will continue, at least for the near term.
Yeah, and the conflict increasingly resembling now a war of wills. Iran, as you said, appears focused on imposing costs on the U.S. and Gulf states. But what is your understanding of the messaging from the Trump administration right now? We seem to be getting mixed messages.
Well, the messaging is wildly inconsistent, so I would probably not pay too much attention to what the Trump administration is saying if you're trying to figure out what's going to happen. It looks probable that the U.S. will continue strikes for weeks. It's trying to paralyze the institutions that are running the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think the most insightful thing any U.S. official said today was General Kane, when he said, "We're trying to stop Iran's potential to project power outside its borders." On Iran's side, they're trying to just withstand this assault while inflicting as much pain as they can on the U.S. and its allies.
We heard from President Macron of France today, who said that France will increase its nuclear arsenal, allowing the temporary deployment of nuclear-armed jets to European allies. How concerning is that? Are we looking at a new nuclear race here?
God forbid. I mean, yeah, it's all very concerning. That's the whole point about wars. People start them with discrete objectives, but they tend to spin out of control and escalate. And we're seeing that happen now. So the fact that Europe is now getting involved in trying to contain or control or direct the hostilities, yes, is an additional source for concern.
Thank you for talking to us and sharing your views. Alan Iyer from the Middle East Institute joining us there from Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Now, the U.S. has changed its tone on the military operation in Iran. President Trump had previously spoken in favor of regime change, but early on Monday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that isn't the plan.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. President Trump has been clear, now is your time. To Iranian security forces, choose wisely. President Trump has also been clear about your fate in either direction. To the media outlets and political left screaming endless wars, stop. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both.
In Kuwait, the Defense Ministry says 3 U.S. warplanes have crashed. The crews are safe. U.S. Central Command says Kuwaiti air defenses mistakenly shot down its jets, adding that the cause is under investigation. 4 members of the U.S. military have been killed in Iran's attacks so far. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, has warned that there could be more casualties.
I want to express my deep condolences and the condolences of the Joint Force to the Department of War personnel killed and wounded in actions thus far. As the Secretary said, they're heroes and represent the best of our nation has to offer. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses, and as always, we will work to minimize U.S. losses. But as the Secretary said, this is major combat operations.
And here's a look at energy installations and transport facilities Iran has targeted. Explosions were reported at Ras al Khaimah industrial city in Qatar. It houses 2 major LNG refineries as well as energy processing infrastructure. The Ras Tanura plant in Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil refineries. It handles more than 500,000 barrels a day. And in Dubai, debris from an attack fell near Jebel Ali port, disrupting energy and logistics operations. In the Gulf of Oman, a projectile hit an oil tanker transporting crude, while another tanker caught fire after an attack in the Strait of Hormuz. Cornelia Meyer is an energy analyst and CEO of Meyer Resources. She says disruptions to regional oil and gas production will hurt Europe and China.
Qatar is the 3rd largest exporter of LNG, so it really does matter. It especially matters to Europe, which wants to wean itself off the Russian LNG and wants Qatari LNG and US LNG. So it does matter, and obviously, if you strike the biggest refining complex in the world, that does matter, but that is more sort of for domestic purposes. But what's really the big thing here is, when can ships safely pass through the Straits of Hormuz again? Because if you look at oil, crude and products together, 20% have to go through the Strait of Hormuz, and if you look at LNG, 20% have to go to the Straits of Hormuz. Oil, it's Asia that's affected.
LNG, it's Europe that's affected. Crude oil is the commodity that's the most globally priced and globally traded commodity. So if the global indices for WTI, Brent and so go up, it obviously also goes up in the US. So Americans will feel it at the pump. It does really also impact countries like China, because China is about 10% of China's crude imports come from Iran. 38% of all the oil going through the Straits of Hormuz go to China. So China and also other Asian countries are very much affected as well.
And U.S. stocks have dipped in early trade Monday, following in the footsteps of European and Asian markets. The growing conflict in the Middle East brought down airline and other travel-related stocks. Losses were partially offset by gains for defense and energy companies, but rising oil prices are fueling concerns about inflation and global growth. Jack Barton has more from Seoul.
After opening on Monday, Hong Kong's Hang Seng and Japan's Nikkei index fell sharply. They later pared back some of the losses, with gains for companies linked to defense and oil. Shares in Japan's two main airlines fell more than 6%, underscoring the fact that 90% of Japan's crude comes from the Middle East.
Peace and security in the Middle East, including energy security, are also of utmost importance to Japan. We will continue to make all necessary diplomatic efforts.
It's not just Japan at risk, as the price of benchmark Brent crude continues to rise. According to U.S. government data, more than 80% of oil and gas passing through the Strait of Hormuz is destined for Asia, with India, China, Japan and South Korea accounting for almost 70% of crude oil passing through it last year.
South Korea says it has enough oil stockpiled to keep prices stable for at least 7 months. And after an emergency weekend meeting, Seoul announced the creation of a fund worth about $69 billion to stabilize the stock market if needed. Analysts say volatility across Asian markets is expected to continue, as long as there is no clear resolution or goal to end the conflict, which has been expanding across the Middle East region. Jack Barton, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
The U.S. Central Command says it's destroyed the headquarters of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, stating it has, quote, cut the head of the snake. But Iran's military structure is notably complex. The country has parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures, all answering to the supreme leader. Ali Hashem explains how the institutions operate and why they're structured as they are.
Iran does not rely on a single military chain of command. Its security system is layered, duplicated, and intentional. At the top sits the supreme leader, the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. Below that authority are two parallel militaries. The Artesh, Iran's regular army, is responsible for territorial defense, borders, airspace, and conventional warfare. Alongside it, there's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, and its role goes beyond defense. Given its ideological structure, it's responsible for protecting the revolution politically and militarily. Within the IRGC, the aerospace force controls Iran's missile and drone arsenal. This forms the backbone of Iran's deterrence strategy against Israel and the United States. Iran avoids merging these forces by design. Duplication here is a safeguard against coups, internal threats, and sudden collapse. Inside the IRGC sits the Basij, a mass mobilization force used for internal security, crisis response, and ideological enforcement. Iran also maintains parallel intelligence services, while the two main branches remain the Ministry of Intelligence that follows the government and the IRGC Intelligence Unit. There are around 16 services that operate under the Council for Intelligence Coordination. Beyond its borders, Iran projects influence through a specialized force. The IRGC's Quds Force manages Iran's regional networks, including in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq, and previously Syria. It operates with tactical flexibility but within limits set in Tehran. Military command is organized through separate entities known as Maqar. The Khatam al-Anbiya unit coordinates joint military operations during wartime and national emergencies, while the Muhammad Rasulullah bloc is responsible for defending Tehran and managing internal emergencies. Both the IRGC and the army maintain their own joint staffs.
All right, taking you to the United Nations, where the Iranian ambassador to the UN, Saeed Iravani, is speaking.
Launched a second deliberate and unprovoked military attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was a calculated act of aggression. Major cities and densely populated civilians areas were targeted. Hundreds of innocent civilians lost their lives. Many more were wounded. This is a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations, especially Article 2, Paragraph 4, which strictly prohibits the threat or use of force against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any state. It is a direct assault on the foundations of international law. The Security Council convened an emergency meeting on Saturday. The facts were clear. The aggression was clear. Responsibility also was clear. In a reckless and unprecedented escalation, the United States and Israel deliberately targeted the supreme leader of Islamic Republic of Iran and many high military officials. Targeting the highest official of a sovereign UN member state is an egregious breach of international law and a direct attack on sovereign equality. Such conduct endangers the entire international system. The United States and the Israeli regime are deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. The schools, hospitals, Red Cross facilities, and residential buildings were attacked. On the first day of the aggression, the girls' school in Minab, a small town in Hormozgan province in southern Iran, was deliberately destroyed. As a result, 165 innocent school girls were martyred. I repeat it, 165 school girls martyred. Their bodies were recovered from a rubble after hours of rescue efforts. On the same day, similar attacks martyred several hundred students in other cities, including eastern Tehran and Abyek in Gazvin province. But just this afternoon, the ambassador of the Israeli regime from this very podium resorted to lies and fabrications, shamelessly denying and ignoring the crimes committed by this regime against children and innocent civilians in Iran. Yesterday, further strike targeted Red Crescent building, Motahari, Gandhi, and Khatam hospitals in Tehran, Abu Zaz hospitals in Ahvaz, 3 emergency checkpoints in Sarab, Chabahar, and Hamadan, as well as residential building in northern Tehran. This morning, missiles struck a densely populated residential area in Sanandaj in Kurdistan province. The full number of casualties is still being verified. These acts constitute aggression. They constitute war crimes. They constitute crimes against humanity. The United States cannot remain silent. The United Nations cannot remain silent. Accountability is not optional. It is deeply shameful and hypocritical that only the very first day of its presidency of the Security Council, the United States convened a high-level meeting on protecting children, technology, and education in armed conflict under the agenda item maintenance of international peace and security, while at the same time launching missiles strike against Iranian cities and bombing schools and killing children. For the United States, protecting children and maintaining international peace and security clearly mean something very different from the UN Charter provides. Words about peace and protection cannot cover acts of aggression. Let's make no mistake, there was no imminent threat from Iran. Our nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. We were engaged in serious diplomatic negotiations. For the second time, the United States chose force over diplomacy and violated the Charter. There are no legal grounds that justify this attack. The so-called preemptive attack has no basis in international law. The prohibition on the use of force is absolute, except in self-defense against an armed attack. Iran is exercising its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter. Our response is lawful, necessary, and proportionate. We target only the military objectives of the hostile forces. We don't target civilians. We don't target the interests of neighboring states. Under international law,
Every state has a duty not to allow its territory to be used for act of aggression against another state. Member states must exercise due diligence to prevent their territory from being used by foreign forces to attack other countries. Iran does not seek war. Iran does not seek escalation, but Iran will not surrender its sovereignty. The issue before the international community is clear. Can a powerful state attack another sovereign member of the United Nations with impunity? If the answer is yes, then the Charter is meaningless. If the answer is no, then this aggression must be condemned and stopped. Double standard will destroy the credibility of this Council. Silence will embolden further lawlessness. As long as aggression continues, Iran will defend itself decisively and without hesitation. The Security Council must act firmly, clearly, and without ambiguity. I thank you for your kind attention.
What was the rationale behind attacking other countries, including Iraq, the UAE, Qatar, and some other countries, Iraqi Kurdistan as well?
As I mentioned, we are not attacking the interests of our neighboring countries. We are defending ourselves. We are targeting the facilities and the bases and the assets of the United States in this country, in those countries which is out of the control of the host countries. Thank you.
That was the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, Saeed Iravani, speaking to reporters there. He described the U.S. Israeli operation against Iran as a reckless and unprecedented escalation, an egregious breach of international law, he said, which endangers the entire international system. He criticized the United Nations, saying the UN cannot remain silent. On Iran's response, very interesting comments from the Iranian ambassador there, who said Iran is lawfully and proportionately responding, and we are not attacking the interests of neighboring countries. Let's bring in Ali Hashem, who's reported extensively from Iran, joining us to uncover these latest developments. What we heard there from the Iranian ambassador to the UN is particularly interesting, especially regarding the Iranian response. What did you make of it?
Well, mainly the Iranians are working on several paths at the same time, parallel lines. One of them is setting the narrative. And what Mr. Iravani is doing in parallel with what foreign minister, deputy foreign ministers, all the officials are doing, they're trying to set a certain narrative with respect to their response, Iran's response to the Israeli-American attack on their country. Now, how they are framing this narrative is, in a way, it has, of course, its problems, it has its flaws, because there are grievances from the countries in the region that Iran is attacking their own very interests when it comes, for example, to the facilities, oil facilities or gas facilities here in Qatar or in Saudi Arabia or in several countries around the region. So these are the big gaps in the Iranian narrative when it comes to...
But what does this narrative suggest to you, Ali? Is it a case of wanting to say that we're in control, or is it, are they not aligned with what's happening in the field?
Well, I think the problem over here is the Iranians want, in a way, to defend their position, to send a message to these countries that this is not meant on you. We do not mean to harm your interests, but we need to make the Americans feel that the price is very high, because American interests is in having a stable economy in the world, global economy. American interest is in keeping this war limited. So the countering the American interest is by making this a global crisis, by creating a kind of a chaos and emerging from a limited war into a global crisis.
All right, Ali, thank you very much for now. If you're just joining us on Al Jazeera, it's gone past 20 GMT. I'm Fully Batibo, and you're watching our continuing coverage of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, which is rapidly expanding across the region. Iran's foreign minister has called on regional countries to pressure the United States to stop the conflict. Abbas Araghchi has been speaking to Iranian state media. Let's find out more with Mohammed Val, who's in Tehran for us. What have we heard from the Iranian foreign minister?
Well, fully, the Iranian foreign minister has just reiterated the lines that we have been hearing from the Iranian authorities over the last few days, particularly since the beginning of this campaign, that Iran has been ready for negotiations and has responded favorably to the call for negotiations several times, and that at the same time Iran has been aggressed against, has been attacked, even though it was progressing with the mediators towards a peaceful solution for this conflict, or for this discord with the United States and with Israel. But Iran is now in a position that it can't have any choice except to defend itself. Also, we have just listened to the ambassador, the Iranian ambassador to the UN, saying basically the same thing and criticizing the course of this campaign and what has happened so far, particularly the attack on civilians, the killing of children, of schoolgirls, and so on, saying this is not a legitimate war. This is a war of aggression against Iran, and Iran, after it has stretched a hand for peace for a long time, now it has only one choice, which is to defend itself, because it hasn't been given any other option in this conflict. And again, the same line about neighbors not being a target of Iranian aggression or so on, but because these are only acts of self-defense against U.S. bases in those countries. Very clear stance here for now for the Iranian public about what the government is doing. And also the president today has reiterated that and said that the killing of children is not going to give victory to Israelis and Americans in this war, and that Iran has the right to defend its country, itself, its nation. The president said the institutions should continue to deliver the basic necessities and services to the people to ensure that continuity is in place, that the government is in place, that nothing is, that the enemy isn't capable of disrupting the normal course of life for Iran and its leadership and so on. We have seen also reports of the use of heavier weapons, heavier missiles, hypersonic ballistic missiles against targets across the region, including in Israel and other parts of the Gulf region. And that is consistent with the promise by the Iranian leaders over the last 3 days that more and more power from Iran will be shown to the world, and that Iran is going definitely to deal a defeating blow to its enemies.
All right, Mohammed, thank you for the updates. That's Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val reporting there from Tehran. Let's take you through the other developments now. In the past few hours, U.S. President Donald Trump has defended his decision to attack Iran and said the military operation could last about 4 weeks.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
Trump said the U.S. will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity and nuclear program. He said Washington is ahead of its time projections in the conflict, saying the U.S. eliminated Iran's top leadership in a matter of hours.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
A day of escalation has seen Iran target energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. Across the border in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precautionary measure. 2 drones targeted Aramco's Ras Tanura facility, but were intercepted. In Iran, Israeli strikes have continued for a 3rd day. These are attacks that hit Tehran. The U.S. and Israel have hit infrastructure across the country. This is the aftermath of an attack which destroyed a police station and the surrounding residential area. Let's bring in Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. Mike is at the White House. So we've heard from President Trump now for the first time since the attack on Iran began on how the war is going, according to him, and how long it could potentially last. Mike.
Well, this issue of time frame has been something that there's been speculation about since the conflict began. As you said, this is the first time that President Trump has spoken publicly live. His previous messages were recorded and put out on his social media page. But President Trump, in his comments today, spoke about 4 weeks or more as a time frame. Now, he had used this period previously in interviews with various news media, but now it's saying it could be 4 weeks or more, and it doesn't matter how long it takes because the U.S. will carry on until it achieves its objectives. Its objectives still fairly unclear, although he's speaking about the complete degradation of the Iranian military and whatever remains of his nuclear program. He also insists that he is still intent on creating some form of conditions within Iran for a popular revolution of some kind, which he was at one stage saying is the end of these operations, but he's moved away from that, looking at the total degradation of the Iranian military machine and the regime there as the end objective. But still, that is one of the time frames we've had. It changes from day to day.
It does indeed. Mike Hanna at the White House, thank you for that. Now, here's a look at the energy installations and transport facilities Iran has targeted. Explosions were reported at Ras al Khaimah industrial city here in Qatar. It houses 2 major LNG refineries as well as energy processing infrastructure. The Ras Tanura plant in Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil refineries. It handles more than 500,000 barrels a day. And in Dubai, debris from an attack fell near Jebel Ali port, disrupting energy and logistics operations. In the Gulf of Oman, a projectile hit an oil tanker transporting crude, while another tanker caught fire after an attack in the Strait of Hormuz. Let's bring in Axel Zaimovic in Doha. How much has concern grown, Axel, in the region in the aftermath of these attacks on energy infrastructure in both Qatar and Saudi Arabia?
Well, Foley, the concern is considerable because what we see here is an energy region under attack. We're talking about 2 different strikes, 2 different countries. Let me start with Qatar first. So what we saw today, following those attacks that you mentioned earlier, that the Qatar State Energy Company announced that it's halting all production of liquefied natural gas. And right after that announcement came through, we've seen energy prices surges across Europe and Asia, and that's why this is so significant. And just across the border on Saudi Arabia, we're also hearing that the Ras Tanura refinery, that's the biggest domestic oil refinery in the kingdom, they say they're shutting down some of the units following attacks by drones, by Iranian drones on their facility. But what's really unsettling here for many people, not just here, but across the world, it's what's next. Because if Iran is willing to attack Qatar's LNG facilities, but also Saudi Arabia's oil facilities, the question is, what about the calculation? Has it changed or not? Because we're talking about a region that supplies a significant portion of the world's energy. Qatar is the largest LNG producer in the world. Saudi Arabia moves millions of barrels of oil every single day. So the question is, if there is a prolonged disruption, it's not just going to be felt here in the region. Everybody else will feel the consequences.
Axel, thank you. Axel Zaimovic in Doha. Now, Gaurav Sharma is an independent energy market analyst. He says consumers will feel the effects of high inflation mostly because of gas prices rather than oil.
The market is currently spooked about how this may unfold. Will it be weeks? Will it be months? Now, first and foremost, it manifests itself in the oil market, which saw a jump of somewhere between 8 and 10%, depending on the vagaries of where the trade takes us once U.S. volumes are meaningfully online. Now, the issue here is, if we had had this crisis, say, 10 years ago, we'd be talking $150 oil prices. The reason we are just about somewhere in the 80 plus horizon is because there's quite a lot of crude out in the market. Natural gas, however, is another matter. We are dealing with very tight markets. There are various pulls on LNG from Qatar and from elsewhere. And it's a very tight market because the Europeans, the Asians are competing for cargoes. Now, if there is a prolonged outage in Qatar, that is very, very bad news. So I'd say gas here is sort of a bigger story than crude oil. I think if you're looking at a prolonged conflict, now let's say this extends beyond, say, the fortnight that the U.S. Defense Secretary or President Trump say that it might last. If it extends beyond that, we look at sort of like 5% increments or potentially touching maybe $100 week to week, slowly, gradually creeping up. In terms of gas prices, it's being felt immediately. The sort of spike was 4 times as much as crude oil, what we're seeing out in the Dutch market and the British market as things stand. Bring it all together, for the average Joe consumer, inflation is going to really shoot up in the short term. If this is a prolonged 5 to 6 month conflict, and we hope not, then I think the inflationary concerns can be mitigated.
And Iran has targeted sites across Israel. The Israeli military says missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and Eilat. At least 10 people have been killed since Saturday. Noor O'Day is joining us now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. So, Noor, missiles are going both ways. Israel is also under fire. What's the latest from where you are?
Well, the Israeli military censorfully only cleared information and a video from Ashkelon, where about 26 or so people were reported to have been injured. Only one of them was described to be in moderate condition, but we know and we heard reports from eyewitnesses that there were impacts and explosions heard in cities across Israel, as far north as Tel Aviv and Netanya and Herzliya. But all in all, what has happened over the past 3 days is that Israelis stayed in the shelters or near them, looking at their days, their work days going by, at the state of emergency being extended, and Israeli leaders telling them that this is going to take weeks, and setting the bar high, because Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is talking about toppling the government in Iran. Now, he still enjoys public support for attacking Iran, but there are questions that are beginning to emerge about how he actually intends to do that from the air, and whether Israel's air defense system can handle weeks of war with Iran, with Iranian missiles raining on Israeli towns, especially now that Israel has also opened another war front with Lebanon, launching attacks against Hezbollah. And the most recent reporting from the Israeli Broadcasting Authority suggests that the Israeli cabinet was in fact discussing a preemptive strike, as they described it, on Hezbollah minutes before Hezbollah launched those missiles overnight and claimed responsibility, thus giving the Israeli cabinet the opportunity to declare this as a reaction.
Noor O'Day in Ramallah. Thank you, Noor, for the update. And there have been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it targeted more than 70 Hezbollah facilities, including weapons storage facilities. There were attacks in the capital, Beirut, as well. The attacks killed at least 52 people, including a senior Hezbollah official. At least 154 people were injured. Let's bring in Heidi Pett in Beirut for an update. So let's start with what's been happening in the south, because there were fresh Israeli attacks there just about an hour ago, Heidi.
Yes, just over an hour ago, 2 villages in southern Lebanon were targeted. These are not frontline villages. They're a little bit further back from the Israeli border. But we understand that there were 2 significant airstrikes just in the last hour. And they're among the more than 50 locations across the country which are subject to forced displacement orders at the moment. Most of those are in the south, but there's also one in the Bekaa. And of course, over the course of today, we've seen repeated orders from the Israeli military warning residents in the southern suburbs of Beirut, the Dahia, to vacate their homes or to leave specific buildings. And we've seen and heard across the course of today significant airstrikes in the southern suburbs of Beirut. You can hear them all across the capital when these huge explosions rock the city.
Yeah, and we have heard, as you said, more strikes on Beirut this evening. How is that affecting people there?
What we're seeing again is similar to the scenes that we saw during the last wave of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. So that was September and October 2024. So people are leaving their homes. They're coming to areas of central Beirut. This morning, at dawn, I was out and about on the streets and people were sleeping in their cars. They were sitting on the streets shivering because it's been very cold here at the moment. Those people are now moving into schools. The schools across Lebanon and across Beirut are mostly closed today, and they're being used as shelters for displaced people. But there are still a number of people on the streets as they're figuring out where to go, where they're allowed to be, and working out their own plans and figuring out how long they'll actually be displaced from their homes.
Heidi, thank you for the update. That's Heidi Pett, live for us in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Let's discuss these latest developments now with Kenneth Kasman, who's joining us from Florida. He's a senior fellow at the Sufan Center. Thank you for being with us. I'll ask you about the regional implications of Israel targeting Hezbollah in a moment. I wanted to get your thoughts first on what President Trump has said this evening. He was speaking for the first time since the attack on Iran began, and he said that operations will continue as long as necessary and did not rule out sending ground troops. What do you make of that?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I've been on your network. I've been on other networks saying this looks like it's headed toward a ground confrontation. And Mr. Trump indeed confirmed that he has not ruled it out because inevitably, if you want to change Iran's regime, which he apparently does, and thinks it's necessary, then inevitably you're going to need ground troops. It's very difficult to accomplish a change in regime with airstrikes, even very targeted airstrikes that we're seeing on IRGC and besieged bases and forces. Very difficult to do just from the air. It really requires ground troops, and he appears to want to take out the regime. He's raised other objectives, mentioned other objectives short of that he might be satisfied with, but it's been clear from all his comments that he would like to see a new regime in power in Tehran.
A ground confrontation, you say, but how does he sell that to the American public?
Well, I've been talking with various contacts today about that. I think the Iranian attacks on the Gulf states have definitely helped that case. He can argue that he needs to send ground troops to take out the regime, to protect Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to protect the oil, to protect other Gulf allies, to protect the region. He can say that he needs to take out the regime to prevent terrorist attacks. There's any number of rationales he could use. Obviously, many in Congress would be very skeptical of giving approval to that, so that would be a difficult sell. But he could make that argument, I think.
We are now also seeing, Kenneth, Lebanon being dragged into this with Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon, on Beirut. How high is the risk today of a regional spread of this conflict, if it hasn't happened already?
Well, we're already in a regional conflict. I wouldn't say there's a risk of it's already a regional conflict. Hezbollah, the Lebanon theater, again shows how Hezbollah is able to operate as a state within a state and drag all of Lebanon into a war with Israel. They've done it several times in the past. Now they're trying to do it again. This is why the U.S. was pressing Beirut, pressing President Aoun to take away Hezbollah's, all of its weapons, use the Lebanese armed forces to take away Hezbollah's entire weapon arsenal. And this, I think, justifies or proves Washington's case again that they've made to Beirut about that.
Right. We've heard the Lebanese government today banning Hezbollah's military activities, but is it in a position, the Lebanese state, to resist and to dictate to Hezbollah what it should be doing? And is Hezbollah in a position to resist a potential Israeli ground invasion?
Well, Hezbollah is not in a position to resist a ground invasion. They might be in a position to resist the Lebanese armed forces if the Lebanese armed forces moves against them. But resisting an Israeli ground invasion, remember, Hezbollah is much, much weaker than it was before. I think that would be difficult. But I don't know that Israel wants to invade. Israel wants to concentrate with Mr. Trump on getting the regime in Tehran out of power, or at the very least making it unable to threaten Israel, unable to threaten the region. I don't think Israel wants to be diverted to another theater in Lebanon now.
All right, thank you for talking to us and sharing your views. Kenneth Katzman from the Sufan Center joining us from Florida. Well, as Israel stepped up its attacks on Lebanon, civilians are paying a heavy price. On Sunday, a journalist lost 7 members of her family in an Israeli attack. The strike occurred in the southern Lebanese town of Toul. Mayadeen Channel correspondent Fatima Fatouni reported directly from the scene of the attack.
We are now in front of a house where the Israeli occupation committed a massacre yesterday against an entire family in the town of Toul. This aggression targeted civilians in their homes suddenly and unexpectedly. This building consisted of 4 apartments. You can see the destruction inflicted on this building. 7 members of my family were killed, as well as another person from the area. My uncle and 6 other family members lived in this apartment.
An emergency meeting has been held at the International Atomic Energy Agency. It follows concerns over U.S. and Israeli actions towards Iran in recent days. The IAEA says nuclear facilities haven't been targeted in the same way they were last June. Bernard Smith reports from Vienna.
So Russia and Iran called for this emergency meeting of the IAEA because they want its board to address what they call the unprovoked acts of armed aggression by Israel and the US on Iran.
It is for the second time that they invade our countries during negotiations. Today, we are supposed to hold technical meetings here in Vienna. Based on such deceptions and unfounded allegations, they targeted or peaceful, safeguarded nuclear facilities.
The Iranians say that one of its facilities at Natanz has been targeted again, although the IAEA's Director General says he's seen no evidence that attacks on the scale of those last June have been carried out this time.
We haven't seen major military activity targeting the nuclear facilities. We have been looking at different satellite images. There might be something there, but not significant.
The IAEA says Iran has 4 declared uranium enrichment facilities, but it has lost continuity of knowledge about stockpiles. There's 440 kilos of enriched uranium at 60%. It takes just a small technical step to get it to 90% and weapons grade. The IAEA has no one on the ground in Iran. It needs to know where that uranium is. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Vienna.
Britain says its involvement in the conflict in the Middle East is strictly defensive, but early on Monday, a suspected Iranian-made drone struck a British airbase in Cyprus, raising questions about how insulated the UK really is. Sonia Gallego reports from London.
The day the conflict in the Middle East reached UK sovereign territory, an Iranian-made Shahed drone struck inside the British airbase in Cyprus overnight, followed by 2 more. Both were intercepted. But the attack sent shockwaves across the eastern Mediterranean island, where Greece is now sending frigates and fighter jets as regional tensions mount. The UK moved additional air assets to the base in recent days, while waves of Iranian drones and missiles hit countries across the Gulf. The government had initially resisted deeper involvement,
but the scale and breadth of the assault on British allies forced a reversal of that decision.
It is clear that Iran's outrageous response has become a threat to our people, our interests, and our allies, and it cannot be ignored.
Pressure also came from the US, with President Donald Trump saying he was very disappointed that Prime Minister Keir Starmer had blocked American use of Diego Garcia military base in the Indian Ocean. A criticism echoed by Starmer's political rival, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, himself a longtime ally of Trump and a prominent voice on the British right.
I do believe the American president and the Israelis are right in what they're doing, and I find the actions of our Prime Minister, or the inactions, perhaps I should say, of our Prime Minister, frankly pathetic.
Starmer had announced over the weekend that the US could use British bases, including Diego Garcia, for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites. But the UK's legacy in the region from the 2003 invasion of Iraq is never far from mind, still recent enough to make even limited involvement feel consequential. While critics say the delay in granting the US access may have weakened Britain's position, what is certain is that Iran's targeting of a British airbase marks a turning point in the UK's role in this widening conflict. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera.
Coming up to 2030 GMT, you're watching Al Jazeera and our continuing coverage of the U.S. Israeli attacks on Iran, a reminder of the latest developments in the conflict. The Iranian foreign minister has called on regional countries to pressure the United States to stop the conflict. Abbas Araghchi has been speaking to Iranian state media. U.S. President Donald Trump has said the Iran operation is likely to last about 4 weeks, but the U.S. will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity. He said his objective is to ensure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons. Tehran has targeted energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas after attacks on 2 of its facilities. Across the border in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precautionary measure. 2 drones targeted Aramco's Ras al Khaimah facility but were intercepted. Now, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations has been speaking. He says the attack on his country is a violation of international law. Saeed Iravani has called on the UN Security Council to intervene and reiterated Iran's right to defend itself.
Iran does not seek war. Iran does not seek escalation, but Iran will not surrender its sovereignty. The issue before the international community is clear. Can a powerful state attack another sovereign member of the United Nations with impunity? If the answer is yes, then the charter is meaningless. If the answer is no, then this aggression must be condemned and stopped.
Let's bring in Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. Mike, the Iranian ambassador there describing the U.S. attack on Iran as reckless and unprecedented, an escalation. How is the Trump administration seeing it and the way it evolves?
Well, we heard from President Trump a short while ago saying that things are proceeding as have been planned, essentially also giving for the first time some kind of time frame, saying that this operation could last for 4 weeks or indeed longer. He added that or longer. So we do not have anything definitive about how the administration sees how this is going to play out while an unseasonal snowstorm comes down here in Washington. But President Trump as well insisting that Iran was too late to come to a decision, that the intention of the United States now is to completely destabilize the Iranian military system, to completely destroy it, in fact, were his words. This includes any attempt at developing nuclear armaments, any attempts even for peaceful reasons, it would appear. And in particular, he mentioned Iran's long-distance missiles, its ICBMs, which President Trump insists were within days of reaching completion and ready for deployment, whereas as his own intelligence is saying that these ICBMs, these intercontinental ballistic missiles, are some 8 years away before Iran is able to deploy any such weapons. So we heard all of that from the president. Significantly, that's the first time he's addressed the American people directly and live. His previous messages to the American people have been in the form of recorded comments on his social media page.
Right, and so he says the operation will last 4 weeks or more. How is that being received by the American public?
Well, it's still to strike home to the general American public. What we do know is recent polls indicate that only 20%, that's 1/5 of the American public, actually support President Trump's action. Another around 40% are completely opposed to it. The rest of the American population, according to these polls, are undecided at present. However, that undecided figure could well change if the casualty rate continues to rise. It was 4 Americans killed yesterday. Now, in the course of the day, there's another death being reported. So these are issues that will have an impact on President Trump's domestic standing, particularly if one remembers that he built his campaign for his first presidency and his second presidency on the basis that America will not get involved in wars in foreign countries, that it's America first. He should not be deploying soldiers to fight on foreign territory. Well, many of his supporters, or at least a significant number of them, greatly disturbed about the fact that he is the person to now put armed servicemen in harm's way.
Mike Hanna at the White House, thank you for bringing us the latest there. Well, the U.S. has changed its tone on the military operation in Iran. President Trump had previously spoken in favor of regime change, but earlier on Monday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that isn't the plan.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. President Trump has been clear, now is your time. To Iranian security forces, choose wisely. President Trump has also been clear about your fate in either direction. To the media outlets and political left screaming endless wars, stop. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both.
And 4 members of the U.S. military have been killed in Iran's attacks so far. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, has warned there could be more casualties.
I want to express my deep condolences and the condolences of the Joint Force to the Department of War personnel killed and wounded in actions thus far. As the Secretary said, they're heroes and represent the best of our nation has to offer. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses, and as always, we will work to minimize U.S. losses. But as the Secretary said, this is major combat operations.
Well, let's speak to Harlan Ullman about this. He's the chairman of the Kiloen Group and a former U.S. Navy officer joining us from Washington, D.C. Good to have you back on Al Jazeera. Did you get a clear sense, Harlan, from the president and from the defense secretary of what the game plan is, the longer game plan?
No. It's very, very confused. We've gone from a regime change to a change in regimes to 4 weeks to I don't know what. But it's interesting because the war has only been going on for 2 or 3 days. What's also interesting is that the number of casualties, blessedly, is relatively small. 20 people possibly in Israel, 4 or 5 Americans killed, less than 600 Iranians killed, and the bulk of them were schoolgirls apparently, and which 150 were killed. So despite all the bombing, when you think there'd be huge amounts of casualties and loss of life, that is at least one positive aspect, that the number of deaths, to me, quite surprisingly, is relatively small. But obviously, every death counts.
Right. But if the U.S. casualties were to rise, would the plan change? President Trump now says it could be 4 weeks or more. Would the plan change if the number of U.S. casualties was to go up?
The only way that would change would be if there was a catastrophic event, if one of our LCS ships, warships in the Persian Gulf, for example, were sunk, and they were massive casualties. But the fact is that the casualty rates are likely to be very, very small. We may lose a couple of airplanes. I'm not saying that's not insignificant, but unless there's a major event with major casualties, you will recall that during the first Iraq War, the bulk of the American casualties when a Scud, that was an Iraqi missile, hit a barracks and 150 Americans were killed. We need something on the order, or Iran needs something of the order of a massive casualty event that would change American perceptions. But right now, the casualty rate is blessedly low, and I assume it will continue that way, as I said, unless there's going to be some kind of a massive failure.
Yeah, and the economic costs are also likely to rise. The Iranians now are shifting to targeting the Gulf region's energy assets, not just U.S. bases. What does that indicate to you about how far they're willing to take this?
Well, there are going to be two metrics, the Dow Jones average in Wall Street and the price of oil. And if they can drive the Dow down a couple of thousand points and the price of oil up many hundreds of points, they're going to be winning. And so we'll see. But this is an economic strategy targeted against the United States and Trump to impose as much economic harm, because that's really the only major weapon the Iranians have, unless they're going to think about invading Iraq, which I doubt. So this is an economic ploy on their part, and we'll see what it does to the stock markets and what it does to the energy markets.
Right. Let me ask you about Israel now and its strategy. There's been an intense aerial campaign on Iran, Israel also hitting Hezbollah in Lebanon. But as you told me earlier, military power can degrade capabilities and raise costs, but it's not really a reliable tool for engineering political transformation, is it, that the Israelis and Americans seem to want in Iran?
Of course not. And let me just tell you what Netanyahu's strategy is. Keep America engaged for as long as possible. The longer the United States is engaged in this particular war, dropping bombs and firing missiles, Netanyahu is really very much, I wouldn't say enjoying this, but profiting this. So that's the Israeli strategy. Whether they actually will have a land incursion into Lebanon to take on Hezbollah remains to be seen, but that would not surprise me if they did.
Harlan Ullman, always good to get your insights and to talk to you about this. Thank you so much for joining us today on Al Jazeera. Now, for a third day, as we've been saying, Iran has continued its attacks right across the region. U.S. bases, ports, and energy facilities have been targeted. Kulsum Sharif has the details.
Iran has continued to attack several areas right across the Gulf. Energy facilities have come under attack. Now, these are the energy facilities that have taken a hit. We've seen an oil refinery in Kuwait, one in Saudi Arabia. We've seen oil ports in Oman, the UAE, and facilities in Qatar that have taken a hit. Here's a look at what's happened in Saudi Arabia. An Iranian drone was intercepted at a major oil refinery. The concern is the falling debris and the damage that it can cause. So here's what's happened here. The Aramco Ras oil refinery had a fire. It was contained, but authorities decided to shut the biggest domestic oil refinery as a precaution. Now in Qatar, we're seeing two facilities that have also come under attack. The Ras al oil refinery and the Maisi power plant. Now, Qatar Energy, the state-owned petroleum company, says it has stopped complete production of liquefied natural gas and other products because of these attacks. Now, this is important because it can have global ramifications when it comes to gas supplies. Qatar is one of the biggest producers of LNG, and it operates the biggest gas field along with Iran. This is not Dome South Pass, and this area closer to Qatar is what it operates. And this area closer to Iran is operated by Tehran. But there's no production happening right now. We also spoke of the oil tankers that have been hit on March 1st in the Strait of Hormuz, an important passageway. An oil tanker took a hit. There's a fire on board. People were injured. And another ship was hit in the Gulf of Oman. One person has been killed. Now, the U.S., 6 Arab and Gulf states have condemned the repeated Iranian drone and missile attacks. They've reaffirmed their right to self-defense.
In the last few minutes, Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander has said that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Iran is to set any ship trying to pass on fire. This is according to Iranian media. So Iran now saying that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and threatening to set any ship on fire that tries to pass the waterway. We'll have more on this when more information comes through. I spoke earlier to Abdulaziz Gashian, a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. He says that if Iran continues to target infrastructure of GCC countries, it may force them into an active military response.
We're heading towards some sort of escalation, and it's unfortunately taking a trajectory that's not very healthy. And it's very concerning, and it's something that I think all GCC states wanted to avoid. There were I think the $1 million question that's been asked here, and I wonder if you all agree with me or not, but $1 million question that's been asked is really, what is the threshold of GCC states? What will it be for them to really enter into the operation and begin to attack Iran? And I think, to be honest with you, firstly, there is no real direct or clear-cut position on this. It will be very much of an assessment. Secondly, I think it will also be depending on two variables. One variable will be the duration of the war.
All right, taking you now to the U.S. Secretary of State in Washington, D.C., Marco Rubio, who's speaking.
Field commanders, it was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act. Going back to the purpose. The purpose of this is to destroy that missile capability. Why does Iran want that ballistic missile capability? What they are trying to do and have been trying to do for a very long time is build a conventional weapons capability as a shield where they can hide behind. Meaning, there would come a point where they have so many conventional missiles, so many drones, and it can inflict so much damage that no one can do anything about their nuclear program. That is what they were trying to do, is put themselves in a place of immunity where the damage they can inflict on the region would be so high that no one can do anything about their nuclear program or their nuclear ambitions. They are producing, by some estimates, over 100 of these missiles a month. Compare that to the 6 or 7 interceptors that can be built a month. They can build 100 of these a month, not to mention the thousands of one-way attack drones that they also have. They've been doing this for a very long time, and by the way, they've been doing it under sanction. You see the attacks they're conducting right now? They're attacking airports, they're attacking hotels, they're hitting not just military bases, they're attacking our embassies directly, they're attacking facilities that have nothing to do with war or with military, and that's a weekend Iran. That's in Iran despite years of sanction. Imagine a year from now, or a year and a half from now, the capabilities they would have to inflict damage on us. It's an unacceptable risk, especially in the hands of a regime that's run by radical clerics. The Ayatollah was a radical cleric. That entire regime is led by radical clerics who don't make geopolitical decisions. They make decisions on the basis of theology, their view of theology, which is an apocalyptic one. That has to be taken very seriously as well. So that was the purpose for what this operation is all about. That's what it's focused on. As the president said earlier today, it is on or ahead of schedule. I will defer to the Department of War to discuss the progress being made at a tactical level, but it was the right decision and an important decision for the safety and security of the world. No. And was there an imminent threat? Did you tell lawmakers that there was an imminent threat? There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Because of an impending Israeli action?
No, well, I mean, two things I would say. Number one is, no matter what, ultimately, this operation needed to happen. That's the question of why now. But this operation needed to happen because Iran, in about a year or a year and a half, would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles, so many drones, that no one could do anything about it because they could hold the whole world hostage. Look at the damage they're doing now. And this is a weakened Iran. Imagine a year from now. So that had to happen. Obviously, we were aware of Israeli intentions and understood what that would mean for us, and we had to be prepared to act as a result of it. But this had to happen no matter what.
Secretary, President Trump said overnight that his top choices to now run Iran were killed in the strikes. Does the United States have a firm plan for how they intend to handle this power vacuum in Iran to ensure that an Iron hardliner does not take power?
So two things, and two things can be true. Number one is our mission and our focus is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and their ability to manufacture them, as well as the threat posed by their Navy to global shipping. That's the objective. That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
So are you saying, based on that, are you saying that there is no responsibility, no plan for the U.S. to at least play a role in whatever government comes next?
We might. We'll see how circumstances play out. But I'm telling you what the objectives of this operation are. The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics. As I've said myself repeatedly for years, the leadership of that country does not reflect the people of Iran, and I think that's been pretty apparent in the protests that you've seen. If there's something we can do to help them down the road, we'd obviously be open to it, but that's not the objective. The objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capability.
Regime change has not gone well for the United States.
The what now?
Regime change has not gone well for the United States for many, many decades. How do you assure the American public that things will not get worse for the next regime that comes in there and replaces the
Well, we would love to see this regime be replaced. And ultimately, as the president has said, he calls... No, but let me finish my answer. As the president has said, he would love for the people of Iran to use this as an opportunity to rise up and remove these leaders. They've been wanting to remove them from a long time. We've seen successive waves of protests, and we've seen them slaughter people, okay? But the objective of this mission is to make sure they don't have these weapons that can threaten us and our allies in the region. That's why we're doing what we're doing now. And while we would love to see a new regime, the bottom line is no matter who governs that country a year from now, they're not going to have these ballistic missiles and they're not going to have these drones to threaten us. That's the objective of this mission, is to deny them the ability to use ballistic missiles to threaten their neighbors, to threaten our bases, to threaten our presence in the region, and ultimately as a shield behind which they can do whatever they want with their nuclear weapons ambition. We were not going to let them hide behind that, and that's why this was such a critical mission to undertake now while they were at their weakest point, and not a year from now where they could inflict even more damage and perhaps already be behind that point of immunity. Go right here behind. Go ahead, you and then you. Yes.
Your critics in Congress have said that they should have a role, they should be able to weigh in here, and there are going to be war powers resolutions votes in Congress later this week. Why not notify Congress ahead of this, and just Congress...
Well, we did. We notified Congress. I mean, we notified the Gang of Eight. We notified congressional leadership. There's no law that requires us to do that. The law says we have to notify them 48 hours after beginning hostilities. We've done that. I think the notification went today. But we did notify members of Congress in advance. But we can't notify 535 members of Congress. Well, the Congress can vote on whatever they want, but there's no law that requires us to do that. And I want to say something, because I see people on TV. Look, that's fine. If they want to take a war powers vote, they can do that. They've done that. They've done that a bunch of times. But people keep saying that there's no law that requires the president to have done anything with regards to this. To begin with, no presidential administration has ever accepted the War Powers Act as constitutional. Not Republican presidents, not Democratic presidents. That said, we have followed the notification at 48 hours, and we're here today. I've done more Gang of Eight briefings than I got in the 4 years that Biden was president and I was a member of the Gang of Eight. All of that said, we've complied with the law 100%. And we're going to continue to comply with it. We've done the notification, and we officially to Congress, but we did notify members of Congress. We just can't notify 535 people. That's not possible, but we did the Gang of Eight twice. I briefed them last week, and then I called them the night before the operation.
Can you tell us what you know this Secretary of the Administration knows about the strike on a building in southern Iran? The Iranians saying the school, of course, large buildings, including children killed.
Yeah, I've seen those reports. I would refer you, not because I'm not trying to answer your question, but I don't want to get it wrong. The Department of War would be investigating that if that was our strike, and I would refer your question to them, and I'll make sure they're aware that you have that question. But we'd like to know. Well, clearly, the United States would not deliberately target a school. Our objectives are missiles, both the ability to manufacture them and the ability to launch them, and the one-way attract drones. That would be our focus, and that's what we would be focused on. We would have no interest and, frankly, no incentive to target civilian infrastructure. The Iranians are, on the other hand, targeting civilian infrastructure. You guys have seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. They're hitting hotels. They're hitting embassies. They're hitting airports. They're hitting oil infrastructure. Well, it'd be very tragic, but I can't speak to the details behind it because I just don't have it. It would be a tragic outcome if it's happened. I don't have the details as to what led to it. But what is clear that the United States would not deliberately target a school. They are, on the other hand, deliberately targeting civilians, as you've seen, because you know why? They are a terroristic regime. They sponsor terrorism and they participate in terrorism.
What's your message to Americans who are concerned about rising energy prices given the spiking of oil prices today?
Yes, and we knew that going in would be a factor, and so we have a program in place that will begin to be implemented by Secretary Wright, Secretary Bessent. We talked about it last night, again, about this program. We talked this morning, and starting tomorrow, you will see us rolling out those phases to try to mitigate against that. Obviously, markets are going to be reacting to news about what's happening. And again, a reminder, think about it, okay? This terroristic regime, led by radical clerics,
has the ability, potentially, to shut off 20% of global energy. That's the kind of leverage they have because of their Navy. We're going to destroy their Navy. But there is a plan in place. We anticipated this could be an issue, and Secretary Wright and Bessent will begin to roll out those steps starting tomorrow to mitigate against the impact that could have. I got to do this briefing, so I got a couple more. Yeah.
Do you anticipate putting boots on the ground, and how long do you anticipate the conflict to last?
Well, we don't. Let me say two things about it. Number one, the president always has the options to undertake whatever operations he decides to do as the commander-in-chief. That said, we believe the objective that we have set for this mission, which is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities, both launch capability and manufacturing, can be achieved without ground forces. Right now, we're not postured for ground forces, but obviously the president has those options. He's never going to rule out anything. But right now, our focus is their Navy because of the threat it poses to global shipping.
How long
Right, I can only do one more. Right there in the middle. Yes, sir.
Is there a diplomatic exchange going on right now between U.S. and Iran? Any exchanges whatsoever outside of
No, not at this time. I mean, look, we always have people that reach out from inside of governments. You don't know if they're authorized to reach out or not. They're suffering a tremendous amount of damage. Honestly, again, I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation. All right? Thank you, guys. Thank you.
vast majority of Americans did not want to see this happen. They don't want it to continue. And we're seeing sort of shifting stories as to why the Trump administration felt compelled to do that. I don't know when we've heard any of these things before, but we've heard now from Secretary of State Marco Rubio that they had to do this for several reasons. He first said, well, we can't let them get to the line of impunity. What does that mean? He said, well, if we waited any longer, if we waited a year to a year and a half, the amount of drones, the amount of missiles, ballistic missiles that Iran would have, even though it's contentious as to whether or not that's actually true. But he argues that they'd have so many that the U.S. and Israel, no one would be able to intervene in Iran. So again, the intelligence on how close Iran was to having those sorts of missiles doesn't really seem to be matching with the rhetoric from the administration, but that now is a new reason they said that they had to act. The other, and this again is a new line, is that they were convinced that if Israel acted, struck Iran, that the Iranians would strike U.S. assets in the region. So he's saying if we did that, then there'd be hearings about why we didn't prepare for that. So saying because Israel was going to strike Iran, that Iran they thought would hit back, that's why the U.S. had to get involved at the time that it did. Very interesting that he said that Iran has been hit hard, but that the worst is yet to come. We've heard that said, hinted at by U.S. President Donald Trump, but to have the Secretary of State come out and say, I'm not going to talk about operational details, but we're going to hit Iran much harder than we have already, that could be some posturing, trying to send a message to the Iranian regime. But he's now, when we talked about the ultimate objectives, because that's a question that they're getting a lot. What is success? The president had said earlier that he wanted to see regime change. Now they're saying the Navy decimated, so as well as ballistic missiles.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Patty. Patty Culhane for us there on Capitol Hill. Well, it is 21 GMT, that is midnight here in Qatar, and you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. I'm Tom McRae with our continuing extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. Now, with air and drone strikes sweeping throughout the Middle East, Iran has added another twist. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has announced that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Tehran will set any ship trying to pass on fire. Well, still, Tehran says it doesn't want to escalate tensions with countries in the region.
We are not fighting our neighboring countries. We are fighting American forces that are based in these countries. And the Americans and Israelis who are attacking us in every way, day and night. For the American bases in the region to move their soldiers to, for example, a hotel, it's natural that this causes an issue. We will use every method to defend our people. Our enemies attack us in many different ways, and we will do the same. In our view, this is not a regional war. This is a war between Iran and the U.S. that is unfortunately spread in the region.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
Well, US President Donald Trump has defended his decision to attack Iran and said the military operation could last about 4 weeks. Trump said the US will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity and nuclear program. He said Washington is ahead of its time projections in the conflict, saying the US eliminated Iran's top leadership in just a matter of hours. Well, 6 Americans have now been killed in the conflict. Speaking just a few moments ago, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Iran was going to target the US regardless of who attacked the country.
It was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond and respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties.
Well, a day of escalation has seen Tehran target energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Now, Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. Well, Al Jazeera is live in Ramallah, Beirut, Doha, Capitol Hill, the White House. But first, we're going to speak to Moval, who is in Tehran. And Moval, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed. That's according to the Revolutionary Guard. Can you just run us through the repercussions of this move?
Well, this is the new phase of this war. At the beginning, we have it limited to direct reciprocated strikes between the United States, Israel on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand, related to military facilities, either in the Gulf or here in Iran. But now we have seen this quick development of the war into a kind of war again, an energy war, because the Strait of Hormuz means energy, not only for the region, but for the international, for the whole world, because a huge percentage of international traffic of oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has been promising, or it has been threatening for several years now, that if it is attacked in this huge manner, it is going to close the Strait of Hormuz. And that's a part of a strategy to make the world feel the heat of this war, and to make it clear that if Iran is attacked, then the world will bear the loss. The loss will be not only in Iran, but also across the region and the world. And that means high energy prices and so on. So now they are showing that they are true to their promise. They have announced the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. We have seen tankers in the Strait of Hormuz being attacked. We have seen them on fire, and that has been reported by the Iranian authorities here over the last 3 days. And now they are announcing the total closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which means that this war is going to get more and more costly to everyone.
Okay. Mohammed, we heard from Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister. He was giving an interview to, I believe, Iranian state television, basically restating that it's not attacking Gulf states, but the U.S. bases that they house. Can you just run us through what else he had to say in regards to that argument?
Well, Abbas Araghchi has reiterated that Iran has been stretching a hand for peace over the last several weeks and months, and that it has been for the second time attacked by the U.S. and Israel when it was when there was a promising approach for the negotiations for peace, and that now the only choice that Iran has is to defend itself. And again, he has reassured, or tried to reassure, the neighboring countries, particularly in the Gulf region, that there is no ill intent and there is no intent of aggression against those countries, and that they are not the target of these attacks, but rather it is the U.S. bases and any facilities related to those bases. But when we look at the developments over the last 24 hours, we see that oil facilities in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar and in other countries have been attacked. How is that going to be reconciliated with what he said, that Iran is targeting only U.S. bases and facilities that are helping those bases? Well, it depends on the interpretation. Iran is interpreting that those countries that host bases for the U.S., everything in those countries that is strategic has to do with interests of the United States. I mean, they haven't said this the same words that I said now, but it is implied in what they have been doing over the last couple of days. But there is an interesting news line that came from the Tasnim news agency today, saying that a source that is close to the Iranian government has said that Iran hasn't been behind the attack on Aramco, and that it is Israel that has been behind that attack in order to stoke fire and create more chaos and more international hatred against Iran. And it also said that they have intelligence information that Israel might be about to attack Al Fujairah port in the United Arab Emirates for the same purpose. So there is this conflicting situation, this confusing situation about who is behind some of the attacks, not all of them. Iran hasn't denied all the attacks that have taken place across the region and touched oil facilities, including the tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. But at least now they are saying that Israel is trying to complicate the situation further by attacking the most important facilities, particularly the one in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you for that update, Mohammed Val, for us there in Tehran. We're going to go to Mike Hanna, who is in Washington, D.C. for us. And we heard from President Trump a little while ago about how the war is going and how potentially how long it could last, up to a month. He also outlined the objectives that the US and Trump is actually seeking here. Can you run us through that? Because it has been quite confusing. There has been criticism of the administration that hasn't been that clear.
Yes, indeed, there has been criticism that there is no indication as to what its final aims are. At which point do they declare mission accomplished and take the exit ramp? There has been popular dissent about that particular issue, but President Trump insists that things are going well. It's the first time he's spoken directly live to the American public. His previous messages have been pre-recorded and put out on his social media page. But he struck an optimistic note saying that it was going well and that the U.S. would continue for 4 weeks or even longer, is what he added. As to the aims, this is what President Trump had to say.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Mike, can you just talk us through some of the domestic ramifications of what Trump has said today? And we've also just got confirmation that 6 US service members have now been killed in this conflict. How is that being received there in the US?
Well, this is a key issue because as these casualties mount, then so too likely is going to be public dissent. We've seen that in the past in the various wars that the US has been embroiled in. But the Washington Post has the most recent poll, which it has just published. And interestingly enough, the nation is completely divided, which is not unexpected. But it's a degree of the division that is unexpected. And that is that only 22% of Americans strongly support President Trump's action in Iran. 17% support somewhat. Some 9% are unsure. And those who oppose are over 52%, nearly 40% of whom oppose strongly. So these are very, very stark figures. And one must remember, too, that this poll was done after the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei was announced. So that did not kind of hit the pendulum at all, it would appear, from the results of public reaction, despite the fact that President Trump hailed that as a great success. So this is a nation clearly divided, but also weighing heavily towards disapproval. And that in itself is going to be a very big problem for President Trump politically in the months ahead and potentially in those midterm elections in November.
Okay, thanks so much for all of that, Mike. Mike Hanna at the White House for us. We're going to cross over to Patty Culhane, who is at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And we heard Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, a little earlier give quite a combative press conference to the media on the Hill. Can you just run us through the highlights from your point of view from that media conference?
Of course, he was here to brief the so-called Gang of Eight. That's the leaders of the most important, powerful committees and the leadership when it comes to national security. He was very defensive, and I think we're starting to see the administration react because they have been saying we'll stop when our objectives are met, but they haven't really been able to lay out their objectives. So we heard a little bit more from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a little bit more from the justification. Now, he said the U.S. had decided that if another country, for example, Israel, attacked Iran, that they were going to attack Iranian assets, so that the U.S. had to get involved. A little bit of flaw in the logic there. Obviously, if the U.S. didn't want Israel to attack Iran, it does have some influence there. Then he said, well, we had to attack now because keep in mind, they've been saying, the president's been saying, because Iran posed an imminent threat to the United States, they haven't been able to actually back that up. So what he's saying now is that because Iran is weak, in a year and a half, they would have crossed this line of impunity, basically, that they would have had so many ballistic missiles and so many drones that the U.S. or Israel would not have been able to attack Iran. Again, intelligence very not clear that that is in fact would have been the case in a year to year and a half. He did send the warning that the worst is yet to come. Now, whether that'll bear out or whether that's rhetoric meant to scare the Iranians in some way, unclear. But he did say the objective is to end the missile program in Iran and to basically get rid of its navy so that it can't pre a threat to shipping in the region. So those are the two objectives. He was asked about, well, what about a new government? He said that'd be great, that we're hoping the Iranian people do that, but trying to downplay the idea that this was about regime change. That's been a shift because the president himself basically said it was about regime change, and now we're hearing from the Secretary of Defense, Marco Rubio, saying that that really wasn't the goal. It'd be great, but it's not the goal. One thing he did talk about, and the reason we're here on the Hill, is we expect this week the House and Senate will take up a bill that basically says the president has to stop his actions in Iran because under the War Powers Resolution Act, he gets 60 to 90 days, then he has to get approval from Congress. Marco Rubio said no president has ever believed the constitutionality of that, but it is in fact the law. So he says go ahead and vote, but the administration clearly believes is that even if it does pass the House and the Senate, the president's going to veto this, and they wouldn't have the numbers to override the veto. But he'll be back here on the Hill in about 24 hours, briefing all the members of the House and the Senate. We'll get a clearer picture after that where the vote might land.
Okay, thank you so much, Paddy. Paddy Culhane for us there at Capitol Hill. Well, for a third day, Iran has continued its attacks right across the region. US bases, ports and energy facilities have been targeted. Mikul Sharif reports.
Iran has continued to attack several areas right across the Gulf. Energy facilities have come under attack. Now, these are the energy facilities that have taken a hit. We've seen an oil refinery in Kuwait, one in Saudi Arabia. We've seen oil ports in Oman, the UAE, and facilities in Qatar that have taken a hit. Here's a look at what's happened in Saudi Arabia. An Iranian drone was intercepted at a major oil refinery. The concern is the falling debris and the damage that it can cause. So here's what's happened here. The Aramco Ras oil refinery had a fire. It was contained, but authorities decided to shut the biggest domestic oil refinery as a precaution. Now in Qatar, we're seeing two facilities that have also come under attack. The Ras al oil refinery and the Maisi power plant. Now, Qatar Energy, the state-owned petroleum company, says it has stopped complete production of liquefied natural gas and other products because of these attacks. Now, this is important because it can have global ramifications when it comes to gas supplies. Qatar is one of the biggest producers of LNG, and it operates the biggest gas field along with Iran. This is not Dome South Pass, and this area closer to Qatar is what it operates. And this area closer to Iran is operated by Tehran, but there's no production happening right now. We also spoke of the oil tankers that have been hit on March 1st in the Strait of Hormuz, an important passageway. An oil tanker took a hit. There's a fire on board. People were injured. And another ship was hit in the Gulf of Oman. One person has been killed. Now, the US, 6 Arab and Gulf states have condemned the repeated Iranian drone and missile attacks. They've reaffirmed their right to self-defense.
Going to go to Axel Zajmovic now, who is here for us in Doha. Axel, that is a growing list of targets that we saw Kulsum lay out. So how much concern has really grown now in the region after another day of attacks on energy infrastructure, not just here in Qatar, but Saudi as well?
Tom, it's quite concerning because we're talking about an energy region under attack now. Two separate attacks, two different countries, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Kulsum already explained what happened in Qatar, and Qatar stopped producing liquefied natural gas. And right after that announcement, we've seen the energy prices surging across Europe and Asia. And that's really significant to know this one. Across the border in Saudi Arabia, domestic refineries also shutting down some of the units because of the Iranian attacks. But what's really unsettling here is the question, what's next? What's going to be targeted next? Because if Iran is willing to target the Qatar's LNG facility and Saudi Arabia's oil facility, so the calculation here has changed, because we're talking about the region that supplies a significant portion of the world's energy. Qatar is the largest LNG producer in the world, and it feeds that gas into European homes, global markets, global supply chains, but also Saudi Arabia on a daily basis shipping millions of barrels of oil. So if there's any prolonged disruption, it doesn't just hurt the region here. Everybody else will feel the consequences.
Okay, thanks so much, Axel. Axel Zimovich in Doha. Israeli strikes on Iran have continued for a third day. Well, these are attacks that hit the capital, Tehran. The U.S. and Israel has hit infrastructure across the country. Well, this is the aftermath of an attack which destroyed a police station in the surrounding residential area. Iran has targeted sites across Israel. The Israeli military says missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and Eilat. At least 10 people have been killed since Saturday. Anita Ibrahim is joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Anita, can you just bring us up to date with the latest strikes there in Israel? Well, what effect that they have had?
Well, we could say that it's been pretty calm in the past few hours, except for a drone alert that was just sounded off in the application that is usually prepared by the Israeli home front. It's been relatively calm, although we are waiting to see the impact of these strikes that took place not just earlier today, but also in the daylight during the day on Monday, and just a few minutes before sunset, where we've seen the latest wave of Iranian-led missiles. Now, in general, the Iranians have said that they're launching the 12th wave towards the region, but they did not specify whether that will be affecting Israel indeed as well. But for now, we can say that it's been a situation of relative calm. The discussion in Israel these days is about whether Israel knows how it's going to be heading towards ending the war. Because, yes, they are praising what they call a huge operational success that not only targeted the head of the regime in Iran, but also they're talking about sustaining severe injuries of the second man in Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're talking about the intention to head into a ground invasion, and we've seen several evacuation threats by the Israeli army towards people in Lebanon, but also in Tehran as well. But the question remains is whether they will know how to move forward beyond the initial strike of the Supreme Leader Khamenei, because they are saying that there are other layers of the Iranian regime, that the government there has been working on a succession plan, knowing the risks that it would entail given the U.S. and Israeli threats against them. So the question is now for Israel that the Israeli army, yes, is talking about a prolonged readiness for maybe a campaign that could take weeks, but whether they will know and whether they will find an appropriate solution, an appropriate agreement that both sides, the U.S. and Israel, will agree on in addition to the region as well when it comes to ending the war.
Nita, we also heard from Donald Trump that this is likely to last 4 or 5 weeks. From the view from Israel, how is that going down there, not just with its leadership, but with the population as well, being under threat of Iranian airstrikes for more than a month?
That distinction is very important, Tom, because yes, we talk about the Israeli army talking about readiness, calling up around 100,000 reservists and saying that they've been preparing themselves for several scenarios, including what we believe is an intention to head into a ground invasion in in Lebanon, and that has been clear ever since the three projectiles were launched from Lebanon. The Israeli army was swift and very immediately struck Lebanon and started a wave of strikes that is continuing until now. But you have the population to take into account. Yes, this part of a psychological war, the Israeli Broadcasting Authority says that the whole population is united in this war, but it will remain to be seen whether the Iranians are going to be continuing with their strikes. That, of course, will always have a negative toll on the population, given the fact that if we compare this time to the last war in June, the number of times that the Israelis were forced to go to the shelters and stay there is much longer, and that could tip the scales against the government if the population feels that it can be heading towards a prolonged war inside these shelters as well.
Thank you so much, Nida. Nida Ibrahim there for us in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. There have been more Israeli strikes on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Earlier, Israeli attacks killed at least 52 people, including a senior Hezbollah official. At least 154 people were injured. There have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it targeted more than 70 Hezbollah facilities, including weapons storage facilities. Israel says the attacks are in response to the rockets and drones Hezbollah fired into Israel earlier on Monday. The group says its attack was in response to the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. After the strikes, Lebanon's Prime Minister Nawaf Salam says he has banned all Hezbollah military and security activities. Heidi Pett is in Beirut for us with the latest. In just the last hour or so, there have been more evacuation orders. What more can you tell us? It looks like we're having some technical difficulties. They will try and go back to Heidi a little later on in the bulletin. Well, as we have been saying, Iranian attacks on Qatari gas and Saudi oil facilities have forced their closure. Well, this is giving rise to fears of the worst energy crisis the world has seen in decades. Osama bin Javed reports from Brussels.
This is Ras al Khaimah, Saudi Arabia's largest domestic oil refinery, after a drone strike. It's now shut down and no longer producing 550,000 barrels a day. Drones also hit Qatar's Ras Laffan complex and Mesaid industrial zone. That stopped Qatar's LNG production, effectively wiping off about 20% of global supply. Qatar Energy's majority clients are from Asia, and it's set to declare force majeure on its LNG and petrochemical shipments. Explosions were reported on Iran's Kharg island, which handles 90% of Iran's crude exports. In addition, companies in Iraqi Kurdistan and Israel's Leviathan gas field have also suspended production. The EU's warning of far-reaching consequences as Iran's attacks and the U.S. Israeli assaults continue.
From energy to nuclear, from transport to migration to security, we must be prepared for the fallout from these recent events.
All this as one of the world's major supply corridors, the Strait of Hormuz, remains closed by Iran. Peter Chase is a former U.S. diplomat who witnessed the 1970s energy crisis. He says a prolonged conflict and closed shipping lanes could have major reverberations.
So the prices of energy long term, if they are raised long term, that will have a large impact on the European economy. I would have another look at this issue of their imports and exports and their overall trade with Asia, because that is the area that's most affected by this.
Rising attacks on energy facilities, major supply routes being shut, and shockwaves through the energy markets is being seen as a perfect financial storm. And if the United States and Iran do not stop the war soon, the entire world is likely to have to pay for it. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
Well, for more on this, we're joined now from Tehran is Fawad Azadi. He is professor at the University of Tehran's Faculty of World Studies. Thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. We've heard in the last hour or so that Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander has closed the Strait of Hormuz, saying that Iran will set fire to any ship that it tries to pass. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the repercussions of that decision?
You know, this is a war zone. The school that was hit, the girls' school, the primary school, is just a few kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz in southern Iran. Missiles are flying everywhere. It would not be a good idea for ships to pass through. And the suggestion is that the ships should avoid this war zone until we have a normal situation. So this is a statement saying, asking ships not to go through.
In the last, less than 24 hours, we've seen Iranian attacks on Qatari gas and Saudi oil facilities. Many saying that this could potentially be the start of the worst energy crisis the world's seen in decades. That's a deliberate action, isn't it, by Iran to do this, to try and put pressure on these countries, to then put pressure on the United States to stop this conflict?
You know, the consensus here among military sources, intelligence sources, is that these attacks on in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, in these areas, are actually done by the Israelis. The Israelis have managed to fight Iran using American soldiers. They want to use Qatari soldiers, Saudi soldiers to join in. Iran has been hitting U.S. military bases and a few other things. For example, the U.S. government evacuated some of these bases, and they have used hotels in these countries to house these military personnel. That becomes a legitimate military target.
But those hotels,
CIA headquarters.
How can you say that those are legitimate targets when clearly they are civilian hotels? There are civilians working and staying there.
The information that we have is that because of security reasons, the hotels that are being used by the U.S. military have moved the civilian guests to other hotels. So the whole hotel is given to the U.S. military for U.S. soldiers to be housed there while this war is continuing, because they don't want to have them in U.S. bases. If that is the case, which normally that's how it works, you wouldn't have U.S. soldiers next to families, you know, in a hotel. If that is the case, which is the logical way of doing it, then that becomes a legitimate military target, because that's where U.S. soldiers are. Iran is supposed to kill enough U.S. soldiers, so the U.S. thinks twice before attacking Iran again.
That's a major escalation, though, to go from targeting U.S. bases in these Gulf countries to targeting civilian infrastructure, if you're saying like hotels or airports that we have seen in Qatar and the UAE as well.
You know, we talked about hotels already. There are other things within cities, like CIA headquarters. That's legitimate military target. They are not, CIA is not based in bases. They're based in office areas. They are present in all these countries, and the CIA is orchestrating a war against Iran. The intelligence on where to hit generally comes from the CIA. So that becomes a legitimate military target. As you know, Iran was interested in a diplomatic solution. The Omani foreign minister, I'm sure we have covered his interview with CBS News. He was basically begging the Trump administration not to attack Iran for good reasons, because once wars start, then these type of things happened. Iran was trying to avoid that. Oman was trying to avoid that. I think the Qatari government was trying to avoid a regional war. But the United States is doing Israel first instead of America first. They decided to attack Iran. We have lost over 550 civilians in the last few days. Iran is fighting for its survival. They want to overthrow the Iranian government so they can disintegrate Iran, balkanize Iran, and get rid of Iran. And Iran has to defend itself. We are very sorry that the situation has come to this situation, but this is not something we started.
Thank you so much, Fawad Azadi. We do appreciate it there in Tehran.
Okay, well, if you're just joining us, here's a reminder of the very latest developments in the conflict between the U.S., Israel and Iran. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has announced that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Tehran will set any ship trying to pass on fire. The channel accommodates the world's largest crude carriers. Still, Tehran says it doesn't want to escalate tensions with countries in the region. President Donald Trump has said the Iran operation is likely to last about 4 weeks, but the US will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity. He said his objective is to ensure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons. Tehran has targeted energy infrastructure in many Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on two of its facilities. In Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precautionary measure to drone strikes around Hezbollah facility, but intercepted. We're going to go back to Mohammed, who is in Tehran, and I understand that the United States and Israel they're continuing to strike Iran. Just in the last couple of minutes, we've had an alert come through saying that the Israeli military has begun a new wave of strikes on the capital. What can you tell us?
Yes, I can tell you that just as you have been asking this question, there have been blasts and heavy sounds of bombardment here in Tehran. I don't know if it was in the mic, but it is going on right now. Also, it has been going on for about 30 minutes now. So there are strikes right now on the city of Tehran. As we speak, there are a number of blast. So the latest result is just as powerful as the war. So far, Israel has also shared a warning and the total evacuation to people in the district of Beirut, which is to the north of the city. That was just a little while ago. That area has been national TV broadcast operation, and also it has the most important reason in Iran and everything. We don't know exactly where Israeli issue is driven. We don't know the specific targets they are going to strike now or later this evening, this night, but it is a campaign that is ongoing. The bombardment is ongoing right now in Iran, and it has been ongoing for the last 3 days. Many cities have been targeted, not only Tehran, but also Kharaj. Kharaj, which is a city to the north of Tehran, has just been hit during the last hour or so. We still don't have the details about the specific targets, but according to ministry estimations, the remaining military facilities and security facilities and institutions related to the government have been targeted these campaigns.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed. We will go back to you as and when we get some more information about the latest strikes on the capital. Thank you. I'm going to go to the capital, Alessandro, joins us from
resources and assets of the United States in the region. That continues to be the official line from Iran. This is what a little bit more of what the Iranian ambassador had to say.
Iran does not seek war. Iran does not seek escalation, but Iran will not surrender its sovereignty. The issue before the international community is clear.
Can a powerful state attack another sovereign member of the United Nations with impunity? If the answer is yes, then the Charter is meaningless. If the answer is no, then this aggression must be condemned and stopped.
Iran's ambassador also said, make no mistake, Iran was not an imminent threat to anybody. He said that his country was in what he called serious talks with the U.S. about its nuclear program, which he called all used for peaceful means. And he said it was the United States that closed the door to diplomacy and left the world where it is right now.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle Elizondo, for us there at the UN headquarters. We're going to bring in our diplomatic editor, James Bays, now, who joins us in the studio. And as we've seen over the last day, Iran change its strategy somewhat and go after energy infrastructure in the region, not just the US bases in the Gulf. That's sending shockwaves not just around the region, though, right around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not entirely sure that Iran currently has a master plan, because it's had so much damage, so many commanders and leaders have been killed. But yes, you're right. It seems that they're not seeking diplomatic negotiations with the United States now, but they are seeking a way to end the war. And the only leverage they've got, I think, is economic leverage.
Of course, it's also down to the military tools that they've got right now. We know that they've got fewer long-range missiles, and it's much harder to send a missile all the way to Israel, much easier to target things that are much, much closer in the Gulf. And clearly, the Straits of Hormuz are an economic choke point, the economic choke point, the number one economic choke point in the world, with 20% of the global oil trade going through that narrow part of the Gulf. And they've decided, I think, now to choke it. Already, shipping has not been going through the Straits of Hormuz. Some tankers have been going through. The majority haven't, because of the insurance cost, insurance risks. But now it seems the Iranians are saying you must not go through, and that is going to cause problems. It's going to cause problems for the oil price, the gas price, for the insurance prices, the global economy, potentially inflation around the world, particularly, I think, going to affect Asia and China, but also Europe will be very worried. Now, I think Iran is hoping that these countries will put pressure on the United States to do something about the situation. The problem for Iran is that they are going to alienate their neighbours, their Gulf neighbours, and be pushing for diplomacy. However, having said that, I think their Gulf neighbours want confrontation too, because they too want to pass to their pursuit. Just on that, obviously for the diplomatic talking administration. And we're in a very strange situation where we have a war, a major war underway, and yet the strategic objectives of the United States aren't really entirely clear. Yes, it was clearly a decapitation operation, but that has happened. What else is the US trying to achieve? They seem to be trying to remove the whole apparatus of the Iranian system. How far are they going to go? When will they be able to millions of Americans if they try again? What will impact out in 2003. And Iran has raised its prospects that maybe special forces go the other way.
Thank you so much, James. As we heard from the correspondents in the US, just about the level of protest that's going on in the Trump administration when it comes to what they are actually trying to do right now. James, we're going to get from Lebanon and Iran. As we reported a little earlier, Donald Trump has been speaking about 6 American soldiers who have died in the Iran operations. Trump said US forces are capable of stretching the campaign as long as it needs.
Somebody said today, they said, President wants to go really quickly after that. There's nothing going about this. I think you'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now, I guarantee you that. We also projected 4 weeks to terminate military leadership, and as you know, that was done about an hour, so that's
We have two guests from Washington, D.C. to discuss this Iran offensive.
Ross Harrison is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and author of the book.
أهلا بكم مشاهدينا وتغطيتنا المطولة.
Thanks so much for joining us. Ross, if we can go to you first. Did you get a sense that Donald Trump there has a clear game plan or a longer-term plan for actually what he wants to achieve right now?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction between a plan and a goal. I think he seems to have articulated a goal, though it moves a bit, and that is basically regime collapse or regime transition, regime change. But in terms of a plan of how to get there, I don't think they've thought that far ahead, frankly. I think part of the plan, part of the belief is
في كلمته قال وزير الخارجية الأمريكي أن النظام الإيراني لديه القدرة على تعطيل 20% من النصف. وقال روبيو إن بلاده تحب أن ترى تغييرا في النظام الإيراني والإطاحة بالحكم هناك. وفي سياق التطورات أعلنت القيادة المركزية الأمريكية مقتل 6 جنود أمريكيين في العمليات القتالية. إلى هذا العاجل الجيش الأردني ننفي بشكل قاطع.
If there is, we've seen no evidence of it.
Yeah, just on that point, Harlan, we've heard from Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth in the last few hours, and it doesn't seem like they're all on the same page. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Oh, the administration is in chaos. There was a briefing on the Hill to staffers in which the Pentagon said that there was no imminence of threat. And now that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and global energy is lacking access to about 20% of its petro supplies, this comes at a great surprise. It seems to me it was self-evident what Iran was going to do, and it would seem that the administration has been caught completely sleeping about all this, with Trump saying we want to negotiate with somebody in Tehran. And as I've noted before, we may come to regret the death of Khamenei, because right now, Ali Ramjani is in charge, and this is a fairly competent guy. So I'm not sure if the administration fully has a plan yet of what it's going to do, whether it had one, and it seems to be already falling way behind in terms of what Iran is able to do in terms of its counteroffensive.
Yeah, Ross, just on that counteroffensive, we've obviously been seeing that the strategy from Iran doesn't seem to be that they're singularly targeting US bases in the Gulf region, but also now the energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia as well as here in Qatar, obviously designed to inflict as much economic pain, and not just regionally, but globally as well. Do you think that that is a sound strategy?
Well, I think given that the regime believes at this point that it has an existential threat, I think it believes that the risk of this kind of a strategy is lower than it was perhaps in the June war, where it was much more of a calibrated, measured response to U.S. and Israeli attacks. So I think it's a sound strategy. I think it depends upon what the threshold of pain is for the United States and for Israel. I think the Iranians are banking on the fact that at some point, the economic pain and possibly even the political pain, and then the prospects of more loss of life on the American and Israeli side will cause some kind of de-escalation and some reconfiguration of our approach to maybe even a readjustment of our goals as to what kind of outcome the United States is actually looking for.
Helen, we've seen 6 US service members already killed in this conflict in the last couple of days. If, as Donald Trump says, this is going to go on for 4 or 5 weeks, that number is likely to rise. What sort of effect is that going to have on, I guess, how the US domestic viewers actually view this war?
Well, several points. First, the fact that there have been relatively few casualties so far, less than 600 in Iran reported, and about 150 of those were apparently girls at a girls' school. And so far the casualties are low. However, if there's a catastrophic attack on one of our ships and you have massive casualties, that will make a difference. But let me make 2 other points. Iran is now in a very interesting position because its bargaining chip is, we will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. How do the Americans react to that? And if the Iranians really want to put the Gulf in complete chaos, they might attack the water supplies because, as I think people know, there's only about 4 days worth of water that's available in terms of reserves throughout the Gulf, and 95% of the water comes from desalination. Suppose Iran is going to attack those desalination plants. I'm not sure the administration considered that, but to answer your question, as long as the casualties are relatively low and there's not a catastrophic event, as there was in Beirut in October of 1983, when 241 American service personnel were killed, the toleration for pain will be, I think, acceptable in the United States, barring a cataclysmic effect.
Ross, just on that, and obviously Gulf countries are very nervous about what is occurring right now. They're speaking on a daily basis to the Trump administration to try and find a diplomatic off-ramp here. What leverage do they have to try and put pressure on Donald Trump at this point in time?
Well, it's not clear. I mean, before the conflict, we were told that the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris were working to urge caution and forestall this kind of military action, whereas the Israelis were basically shouting that now is the time, because of the weakness, the perceived weakness of the Islamic Republic at this moment. The Israelis were pushing for a military action. So it appears, if we can believe the reports, that the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris were working and trying to urge caution. We would assume that the Saudis, the Emiratis, sort of lost out to the Israelis. But as you know, in the last couple of days, there have been reports that the Saudis actually, privately, publicly, they were pushing for diplomacy. Privately, they were urging Donald Trump to take advantage of the weakness of the Islamic Republic. So it's unclear what kind of leverage they have. I think right now, I think Harlan spoke to this before, and that is, I think the leverage is going to come in terms of pain. If, in fact, the pain is de minimis in terms of loss of life and economic disruption, then I think the United States and Israel can maintain its current course. And the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Gulf Arab states are not going to have much leverage in terms of stopping. I mean, listen, it's a lot easier to get into a war than it is to stop a war. So I don't think they're going to be able to forestall the next phase of this conflict. But I think the Iranians may be counting on this. If there's a compounding effect of economic pain, closing the Straits of Hormuz, if the Iranians can actually do that, and possibly greater loss of life, and then some kind of economic catastrophic kind of impact, either on the energy markets or on the global equity markets, I think then at that point, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Gulf Arabs may be able to have a louder voice than the Israelis. But at this point, I think it's the main dynamics are between Washington and Jerusalem.
Okay, Helen, just before we go, can you just give us an idea from a military perspective, what you're looking for over the next day or two?
Well, I think we're running out of targets in Tehran and in Iran. And we're going to be lowering our magazine loads. So there's going to be an issue here of attrition. Over the next couple of days, I'm seeing raids, but then going to be stopped to get bomb damage assessment and then to continue. But the issue right now is closing the strait is going to cause huge pressure. And if gasoline goes up to $3.50 a gallon, which it easily could in America, then I think you're going to see Trump trying to find some kind of negotiation to get his way out of this. And it may be the Houthi solution, where we just declare victory and pull away. But the consequences could be extreme. And I think, as Ross points out, we have underestimated what we've gotten into in the Gulf. And I'm afraid that's a great weakness in this administration, of not anticipating what Donald Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns that are part of warfare and the fog and friction of war.
Thank you so much, Harlan.
May I make one more comment? Is it possible?
Oh, yeah, quickly, Ross. Yes, you can.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I think is important to understand is that if the Iranians the Iranians cannot win militarily. So I think if they can hold on for the next couple of weeks and at least deny Israel and the United States from a victory, that is a win, even if they are depleting their military assets. So they don't have to win militarily. If the regime can survive and stay roughly intact, that is a victory for the Islamic Republic and a loss in many ways for the United States and Israel. How Donald Trump will portray that and spin it at that point, that remains to be seen. But I think that dynamic is an important one to look at.
Okay, thank you so much, Ross. Ross Harrison.
Correct.
And thank you. We'll have to leave it there. We're out of time, but we do appreciate your insight. Harlan Ullman and Ross Harrison for us there.
Thank you.
Israel is carrying out another wave of strikes on Beirut. These are live pictures from the capital of Lebanon. We are going to go to Heidi Pett, who is live for us in Beirut. And what more do we know about what's been hit so far, Heidi?
So a very short while ago, the Israeli military's Arabic language spokesperson issued another warning to residents in Dahia in the southern suburbs of Beirut, a forced evacuation order once again, indicating that they would be striking targets there in the very near future. And so we expect that these airstrikes that you're just seeing and hearing now are the result of that. Israeli media is reporting that they were planning to target the offices of Al Mana, which is a local television station here. We don't yet have confirmation as to whether that has happened, whether these strikes that you've just seen are indeed that one, or whether there are further strikes to hit the capital of Lebanon tonight.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. We will talk to you, no doubt, in the coming hours as the story develops. The Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes on Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents in parts of the capital. These are live pictures from Tehran now. We understand that Iranian state media say 2 explosions have been heard around the headquarters of its state broadcaster. Well, the U.S. Central Command says it's destroyed the headquarters of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, stating it has, quote, cut the head off the snake. But Iran's military structure is notably complex. The country has parallel armies, multiple intelligence services, and several command structures, all answering to the supreme leader. Ali Hashim explains how the institutions operate and why they are structured as they are.
Iran does not rely on a single military chain of command. Its security system is layered, duplicated, and intentional. At the top sits the supreme leader, the commander-in-chief of all armed forces. Below that authority are 2 parallel militaries. The Artesh, Iran's regular army, is responsible for territorial defense, borders, airspace, and conventional warfare. Alongside it, there's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, and its role goes beyond defense. Given its ideological structure, it's responsible for protecting the revolution politically and militarily. Within the IRGC, the aerospace force controls Iran's missile and drone arsenal. This forms the backbone of Iran's deterrence strategy against Israel and the United States. Iran avoids merging these forces by design. Duplication here is a safeguard against coups, internal threats, and sudden collapse. Inside the IRGC sits the Basij, a mass mobilization force used for internal security, crisis response, and ideological enforcement. Iran also maintains parallel intelligence services, while the two main branches remain the Ministry of Intelligence that follows the government and the IRGC intelligence unit. There are around 16 services that operate under the Council for Intelligence Coordination. Beyond its borders, Iran projects influence through its specialized force. The IRGC's Quds Force manages Iran's regional networks, including in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq, and previously Syria. It operates with tactical flexibility but within limits set in Tehran. Military command is organized through separate entities known as Maqar. The Khatam al-Anbiya unit coordinates joint military operations during wartime and national emergencies, while the Muhammad Rasulullah bloc is responsible for defending Tehran and managing internal emergencies. Both the IRGC and the army maintain their own joint staffs. They coordinate. Above the battlefield sits the political security layer, the Supreme National Security Council, which brings together senior military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and political leaders to align national security policy. It coordinates strategy, but it does not replace military command. This system may appear complicated and fragmented, but this is done on purpose, and it's central to how Iran manages power. Even after the killing of senior IRGC commanders and joint staff figures, transitions have been orderly. Iran's military structure is built to absorb shock, but it's not clear yet whether it can adapt to faster and more complex changes. Ali Hashim, Al Jazeera.
Well, US President Donald Trump on Monday again warned Americans without evidence that Iran was building a missile that could soon reach the United States. That's why he intends to continue attacking Iran. White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett reports.
Speaking for the first time from the White House since launching military strikes against Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump explained why he deployed U.S. forces.
This was our last best chance to strike.
At a medal ceremony honoring American soldiers, Trump laid out his objectives for the mission, dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
We're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Following U.S. strikes on Iran in June of 2025, Trump says Iran defied warnings to halt pursuing a nuclear weapon and was using its conventional ballistic missile program to shield nuclear ambitions. Trump also explained why he gave up on diplomacy.
We thought we had a deal, but then they backed out. And they came back, and we thought we had a deal, and they backed out. I said, you can't deal with these people.
Well, good morning.
Hours earlier, the defense secretary acknowledged there have been U.S. casualties. He explained how Iran broke through U.S. defenses, killing 4 soldiers.
Every once in a while, you might have one, unfortunately, we call it a squirter that makes its way through. And in that particular case, it happened to hit a tactical operations center.
And the chair of the Joint Chiefs cautioned there could be more deaths.
This is not a single overnight operation. The military objectives that CENTCOM and the Joint Force have been tasked with will take some time to achieve, and in some cases will be difficult and gritty work. We expect to take additional losses.
President Trump insists combat operations are ahead of schedule. Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran. He's also cautioned Americans that combat operations could last more than a month. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, the White House.
Well, it's 22 GMT and you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. I'm Tom McRae with our continuing extensive coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel and Iran, which is rapidly expanding across the region. Well, this hour, the Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes in Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents in parts of the capital. The warnings are focused on areas near major broadcasting headquarters. In Lebanon, residents in southern Beirut have also been told to leave ahead of expected military action. Well, this follows heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs earlier on Monday. The strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. And there have also been Israeli strikes across southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says it hit more than 70 Hezbollah targets, including weapons storage facilities. Israel launched the attacks early on Monday after the Iranian-backed group fired rockets into northern Israel in response to the assassination of Iran's supreme leader.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
U.S. President Donald Trump has defended his decision to attack Iran and said the military operation could last about 4 weeks. Trump said the U.S. will do whatever it takes to destroy Iran's missile capacity and nuclear program. He said Washington is ahead of its time projections in the conflict, saying the U.S. eliminated Iran's top leadership in just a matter of hours. And a day of escalation has seen Tehran target energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. And across the border in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom has shut its biggest domestic oil refinery as a precautionary measure. 2 drones targeted Aramco's Ras al Khaimah facility, but were intercepted. Okay, well, Al Jazeera is live right across the world in Ramallah, Doha, the Capitol Hill, the White House, as well as Beirut, where we go to first. Heidi Pett is standing by for us in the Lebanese capital. As we mentioned, there have been more strikes in the last half hour or so on Beirut. Can you just talk us through the very latest there?
Yeah, so in the last hour, there was another forced evacuation order for residents in the southern suburbs of Dahia, which is just the southern part of the capital here in Beirut. These strikes were evidently a little smaller, a little bit more limited. They weren't like the ones that we've been hearing earlier this evening, about 6 hours ago and this morning, which shook the entire city. These ones were evidently a little bit smaller, but Israeli media, Channel 15, has been reporting that they were planning on targeting the headquarters of a TV channel, which they say is associated with Hezbollah al-Manal. And so we are waiting for confirmation as to whether these strikes, these recent ones, are indeed the ones that have targeted the headquarters of a television station here in Beirut, or if that is still to come, and we're expecting to see further strikes across the capital this evening.
Okay, Heidi, Israel's also saying it's killed the head of Islamic Jihad.
Yeah, just a short while ago, again, we get all of the news here in Beirut from the Arabic language spokespeople of the Israeli military. That's how people learn that they're supposed to leave their homes. It's how they learn whether or not people have been assassinated. It's the middle of the night here, and you've got a country that is glued to Twitter to find out what is going on and what the Israeli military has been up to. So they have just announced that in a strike earlier on Monday that they killed the leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad somewhere here in Beirut.
Okay, thank you so much, Heidi. We will come back to you as and when we get some more information. Heidi Pett for us in Beirut. Well, the Israeli military has conducted strikes across Tehran, saying this hour it has targeted the state media broadcaster. It follows a social media announcement for civilians to clear specific areas. Mohammed Val is in Tehran with more.
This is the new phase of this war. At the beginning, we have it limited to direct reciprocated strikes between the United States, Israel on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand, related to military facilities either in the Gulf or here in Iran. But now we have seen this quick development of the war into a kind of war again, an energy war, because the Strait of Hormuz means energy, not only for the region, but for the international, for the whole world, because a huge percentage of international traffic of oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has been promising, or it has been threatening for several years now, that if it is attacked in this huge manner, it is going to close the Strait of Hormuz. And that's a part of a strategy to make the world feel the heat of this war, and to make it clear that if Iran is attacked, then the world will bear the loss. The loss will be not only in Iran, but also across the region and the world. And that means high energy prices and so on. So now they are showing that they are true to their promise. They have announced the closing of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, joining us now from Tehran is Fawad Azadi. He's a professor at the University of Tehran's Faculty of World Studies. Thanks for being with us once again. We'll get to the ramifications of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in just a moment. But first, we've been talking and seeing some pictures out of the capital there of more Israeli strikes. Understand it's on the state media complex. Can you just give us a bit of an update, if you have one, on what's happening there in the capital right now?
You know, I'm in Tehran. I'm at home. We are in the middle of the city. And we had heavy bombardment a few minutes ago. As you reported, the Israelis are hitting Iranian television stations. They did this last night as well. We had one of your colleagues, a journalist, killed last night. But tonight it's much heavier. And they have been trying to disrupt Iranian television stations. So the only source of information for Iranians are television stations run by the U.S. government or the British government or the Pahlavi outlets. And they want to control the flow of information for propaganda purposes, which is very sad, but this is what we have tonight.
In the last couple of hours, Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander has said that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and Iran will set fire to any vessel that tries to pass through it. Can you just talk us through the ramifications of that decision?
You know, this is a war zone, and it would not be a good idea for ships to go through a war zone. Some of the vessels that are used on both sides sometimes go astray, and making sure that people are not hurt on these ships becomes important. So what Iran is saying is that staying away from the Strait of Hormuz until the U.S. president decides to end its war of aggression against Iran would be a good idea.
Fawad, can you also talk a little bit about the new leadership in Iran since the Supreme Leader was killed? Do they currently have control over the Revolutionary Guards and the military? Who's making these decisions at this point in time, or where to strike and how to strike?
You know, because of the sophistication that both United States and Israeli militaries have, communicating with different cells, military cells, is a challenge, because that's the best way of finding out where they are if you are the enemy. So before the start of the war, realizing that U.S. and Israel may attack Iran, they have made decisions on what needs to be done, and some of these decisions are trusted in local military leaders, and generally they may decide without instructions what needs to be done. This is the only way Iran could safeguard their ability to function. If they wanted to be on the phone all the time, that would be the way of finding where they are, and the U.S. and Israel would be able to kill them. And this is one reason Iran wanted to avoid a military confrontation with U.S. and Israel, because their militaries are stronger than Iranian military. So you don't want to be fighting with them. That's why Iran was interested in a diplomatic solution. That didn't happen. Trump wants to change Iran's government, and they have started the war. It is very sad. We have lost over 550 civilians already. And they're saying that they want to continue this war for a few weeks.
Indeed, 4 weeks, Donald Trump said a few hours ago. Now, in the latest interview that the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi gave, he said that Tehran is not in a war with regional countries, but it's moved its targets from US bases in the Gulf to not only airports, but energy infrastructure, which we've seen productions shut down in Saudi Arabia, as well as here in Qatar. Is there a risk, though, that Iran is actually going to make enemies of its Gulf neighbours?
The hope that Iran has is that the Persian Gulf countries realize that Iran wants to have good relations with them. With countries like Oman or Qatar, Iran's relations has been good. You remember, I don't know if you were in Doha in 2017, but when Qatar faced the blockade from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Egypt, the borders were closed in west, east, and south of the country. North was the only way that they could travel, and it was Iran that helped Qatar. So there is this history of cooperation. The Qatari government was very helpful in trying to reach a diplomatic solution. We had the Amir going to Washington, doing basically what the Omani foreign minister was trying to do, avoid the war. Unfortunately, the war started against Iran. These American bases are located in these countries, and Iran cannot reach proper United States. So if they want to inflict cost to the United States, the only option Iran has is to hit these bases and wherever U.S. soldiers are. So if they're in a hotel, that hotel would be a target. CIA headquarters would be a target. And some of these missiles are shut down. And when you shoot down a missile, the debris falls in places that were not intended to be hit. And that's Iran cannot do much about that.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Fawad Azadi for us in Tehran. Well, the Trump administration has responded to growing pressure to clarify its objectives in the conflict. Mike Hanna is joining us from Washington, D.C. Mike, we've heard President Trump talk about how long the war is going to go on, potentially 4 or 5 weeks. But can you just outline exactly what he said about what the United States wants to achieve here?
Well, his phrase was 4 weeks or more this conflict is expected to carry on. He says that it will continue until the U.S. achieves its objectives. Well, what are its objectives? That's the question that many have been asking in recent days. And President Trump did address this in a sentence, and this is what he had to say.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
It's important to note that this was the first time that President Trump has addressed the U.S. public live. This was a medal ceremony being held at the White House, but his previous comments to the American public have been via pre-recorded videos put out on his social media channel. So this is the first time the American people have heard him speaking live about the decision that he took.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike Hanna, for us there at the White House. We're going to go to Patty Calhoun, who's also in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also been speaking in the last couple of hours. Can you just give us a rundown of what he said and what was a relatively combative media conference?
Yes, it was definitely. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is walking into the secure room where he's going to be briefing, or he is currently briefing, the Gang of Eight, as they're called. Those are the top leaders, both Republican and Democrat, on key national security committees. He was a bit defensive. And again, as Mike just mentioned, the question has been repeatedly posed to these officials, what is the objective? And he basically said, I don't know how hard this is for you to figure out. Let me tell you this again. He went on to say some of the justification, and some of it was a bit new. He talked about that the U.S. believed Israel was going to strike Iran and that Iran's response would be to strike U.S. targets. He didn't bring up the fact that if the U.S. didn't want Israel to strike Iran, it had some leverage. And then he did say that they needed to make sure Iran didn't cross, in his words, the line of immunity. He said in a year to year and a half, the U.S. was afraid that Iran would have so many missiles and so many drones that nobody would be able to target them or their nuclear program. So that's a bit of a new justification. He also said that the goals, getting back to the goals, the goal is to, as the president just said, get rid of the Navy and also make sure that missile facilities are destroyed. And he also had a pretty dire warning for the Iranian people.
The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics, as I've said myself repeatedly for years. I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now.
Patty, obviously we heard Marco Rubio there. We've also heard Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump all speak in the last few hours. Are they all on the same page, though? Because there has been some criticism, hasn't there, that there's a lack of clarity from the Trump administration at this point.
Well, and that's the thing. If you look at the history of this country, Donald Trump came to office saying, if you elect Kamala Harris, there'll be World War III. He promised that the U.S. would stay out of foreign wars. And that is the big, real question here in Washington. That's why you hear them talk about days, weeks, not, a shorter time. And Pete Hegseth said that this isn't a forever war because Americans don't want this. They don't want another military invasion in the Middle East. They've learned their lessons from Iraq, from Afghanistan, where again, the pretext was that the U.S. was at risk, but it turned out, in fact, the U.S. was not at risk from Iraq. So they're trying to tamp down expectations of just how long this will take because this move has been very unpopular. 1 in 4 Americans agree with this decision. Even some Republicans now saying in polls that they believe Donald Trump is too quick to use force.
Okay, thank you so much, Patty. As always, we do appreciate it. Patty Calhoun for us on Capitol Hill. Well, joining us from Washington, D.C. now is Adam Clements. He's a former Pentagon official. Thanks very much for being with us again, Adam. We've seen the number of the U.S. service members killed rise to 6. I mean, we're only 3 or 4 days into this conflict. Is that to be expected? And what's your response to how Donald Trump and the administration has handled that aspect of this conflict?
Thank you, Tom. I think any time that any military in the world conducts such operations that are ongoing right now, I think there's some type of understanding of what could happen. This could be from our service members in the Air Force, or as you've seen in some of the retaliatory attacks on the ground, or Navy. So I think it's a hard question to answer because you always anticipate that this could be a problem. Military planners, of course, anticipate what costs could be in both personnel and material and other things. But this is the story as well of what I think you've been discussing with others before I've come on to the interview of the administration clearly articulating the justification and reason why this operation is worth American blood and treasure, and that's what always has to be clearly defined. And I realize that the administration, several officials have tried to clarify that a little bit better in the past few hours, but I still think there's a lot of uncertainty here. A lot of these objectives are still, the strategic end state, let's say, is still, I think, a big question mark for me.
Why do you think that is? Obviously, there's been talk of this happening, the US striking Iran for weeks, if not months. So why do you think there is that ambiguity around exactly what the United States is wanting to achieve?
Well, I think it'd be natural in any type of military operation, no matter what administration, Republican or Democrat, would be in the White House, that there'd be some type of ambiguity, that no one in the Pentagon and the White House and the State Department at U.S. combatant command around the world will give away everything. But I do think, though, however, at the same time, there have to be clearly stated goals, not only to the U.S. public of why an administration is going about conducting such a military operation, to the U.S. Congress. So I think it's a little both. And so perhaps we're seeing a little bit of catching up here, of the administration trying to catch up to its messaging. And so that's maybe some things we'll see also in the coming days. But there's still, as I said, I think there's still some ambiguity strategically of what it is exactly the U.S. wants to achieve, because the Defense Secretary, Hegseth, has walked back some of the comments that Trump said himself about some type of regime change. So the regime change, rather.
Also, Marco Rubio did say, though, that the US is not postured for ground forces in Iran at this moment, but President Donald Trump has those options open to him. What did you make of a comment like that? Obviously something that up until this point had all but been ruled out by the Trump administration.
Well, I think the administration, just as I said, any administration, any military operation will leave that open. I will just say as well, just have to look at a map as far as the logistics of what would be required from anything from a major ground operation to something more limited, to something more precise that we saw in Venezuela. But the logistics in Iran are much more difficult as they were in Venezuela. So I think it's difficult to compare apples to apples, if you will, using that term for there. So I still think that there's a lot in the air campaign and destroying some of infrastructure and Iran's Navy capabilities that I think would probably seem to be the current priorities.
Okay, Adam, thank you so much. We'll leave it there for the moment. We do appreciate it, though. Adam Clements for us, former Pentagon official out of Washington, D.C. Well, the conflict is affecting energy prices. European gas prices have surged by around 35% after Qatar's state-run energy company halted LNG liquefied natural gas production. Now, the suspension follows Iranian attacks on two major facilities. Qatar shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. Oil prices are also up. Brent crude was trading at about $82 a barrel on Monday. That's the highest since January last year and up 13% from Friday's close. Well, here's a look at the energy installations and transport facilities Iran has targeted so far. Explosions were reported at Ras al Khaimah industrial city in Qatar. It houses two major LNG refineries as well as energy processing infrastructure. The Ras Tanura plant in Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil refineries. It handles more than 500,000 barrels a day. And in Dubai, debris from an attack fell near Jebel Ali port, disrupting energy and logistics operations there. In the Gulf of Oman, a projectile hit an oil tanker transporting crude, while another tanker caught fire after an attack in the Strait of Hormuz. The head of the IRGC says it will attack any ships trying to pass the critical shipping lane. We're going to cross now to Axel Zajmovic, who is here for us in Doha. And as I'm reading through that, that's a growing list of targets. So how much is concern growing now in the region in the aftermath of these attacks on energy infrastructure in Qatar, Saudi and the UAE?
quite concerning, Tom, because we have a situation now. We're not seeing only U.S. military bases targeted, but also energy infrastructure. You explain what happened in Qatar, 2 different attacks in the region, one Qatar, one Saudi Arabia. What happened in Qatar? We see that they stopped producing liquefied natural gas, and prices already reacted across Europe, across Asia. And in Saudi Arabia, neighboring Saudi Arabia, we'll also see that they are shutting down some of the units there. But what's really unsettling here in this situation is the question of what's next. So if we see Iran targeting this energy infrastructure across the region, the calculation here has changed. And now we're talking about the region that's significant for producing one of the largest energy supplies across the world. So Qatar is producing LNG, and that natural gas is being fed into European homes, global markets, global supply chains. Saudi Arabia is shipping millions of barrels of oil every single day. So any disruption, if it continues, it doesn't just stay here. So it grows, and it definitely will affect the rest of the world.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Axel. Axel Zaimovich in Doha. Well, Iran has targeted sites across Israel. The Israeli military says missiles were intercepted above West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and Eilat. At least 10 people have been killed since Saturday. Nida Ibrahim is joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and strikes are going both ways. We've heard in the last hour that Israel is hitting both Lebanon and Tehran. What more has Israeli leadership said about both of those?
Well, they are continuing to say that they will continue their strikes not only in Iran, targeting the media channels, including the main TV station, saying that they will also target Al Manar TV station in Lebanon. This is a Hezbollah affiliated news channel. And they are also talking about another warning, an early warning that came just now, targeting the northern side of Israel, the northern areas. We don't know yet whether this missile is being fired from Lebanon or from Iran, but we know that we are expecting sirens to be sounding off in the northern part of Israel soon. In general, there are talks in Israeli media about a success, an operational success, if you may, by eliminating the head of the Iranian regime. We're talking about Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. So there's a lot of military success as far as the political analysts in Israel are concerned. But there are also many questions that are being raised about the scope of the war, about the ability for the population to handle such heavy strikes. Again, we don't know the scope and the impact of many of these strikes, as Israel keeps saying that they intercepted them. But from previous experience, Israel does not fulfill its duties to the people, let's say, and does not really tell the audience and the public the true reality of the damage that has been incurred through or by these Iranian missiles. And as we've seen in the past war in June, there have been so many leaks about potential damages and damages that were caused to military sites and military areas that were not disclosed to the population. Now, again, I guess the key question is how much more can Iran send? How much more missiles can they direct towards Israel? And that will probably give us a guideline or give us an indication, really, about the future of this war and how it's going to end and when.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Nida. Nida Ibrahim for us there in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Well, this hour, the Israeli military says it's begun a new wave of strikes on Tehran after issuing forced evacuation warnings for residents in parts of the capital. Iran's state media is reporting explosions around major broadcasting headquarters after Israeli warnings. In Lebanon, Israel has carried out heavy airstrikes on Hezbollah-controlled suburbs after ordering forced evacuations for residents earlier on Monday. At least 52 people were killed and more than 150 others wounded, according to officials. The strikes came in response to a Hezbollah drone and rocket attack on Israel. And Iran has targeted energy infrastructure in Gulf states, triggering a surge in global gas and oil prices. Qatar's state-owned petroleum company has halted all production of liquefied natural gas, LNG, after attacks on 2 of its facilities. Iranian attacks on Qatari gas and Saudi oil facilities have forced their closure, raising the possibility of the worst energy crisis the world has seen in decades. As the death toll rises and economic damage worsens, diplomacy to avert disaster becomes more and more urgent. Osama bin Javed reports from Brussels.
This is Ras al Khaimah, Saudi Arabia's largest domestic oil refinery, after a drone strike. It's now shut down and no longer producing 550,000 barrels a day. Drones also hit Qatar's Ras al Khaimah complex and Mesaid industrial zone. That stopped Qatar's LNG production, effectively wiping off about 20% of global supply. Qatar Energy's majority clients are from Asia, and it's set to declare force majeure on its LNG and petrochemical shipments. Explosions were reported on Iran's Kharg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's crude exports. In addition, companies in Iraqi Kurdistan and Israel's Leviathan gas field have also suspended production. The EU's warning of far-reaching consequences as Iran's attacks and the U.S. Israeli assaults continue.
From energy to nuclear, from transport to migration to security, we must be prepared for the fallout from these recent events.
All this as one of the world's major supply corridors, the Strait of Hormuz, remains closed by Iran. Peter Chase is a former U.S. diplomat who witnessed the 1970s energy crisis. He says a prolonged conflict and closed shipping lanes could have major reverberations.
So the prices of energy long term, if they are raised long term, that will have a large impact on the European economy. I would have another look at this issue of their imports and exports and their overall trade with Asia, because that is the area that's most affected by this.
Rising attacks on energy facilities, major supply routes being shut, and shockwaves through the energy markets is being seen as a perfect financial storm. And if the United States and Iran do not stop the war soon, the entire world is likely to have to pay for it. Osama bin Javed, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
Iran's foreign minister says Tehran doesn't want to escalate tensions with countries in the region.
We are not fighting our neighboring countries. We are fighting American forces that are based in these countries, and the Americans and Israelis who are attacking us in every way, day and night. For the American bases in the region to move their soldiers to, for example, a hotel, it's natural that this causes an issue. We will use every method to defend our people. Our enemies attack us in many different ways, and we will do the same. In our view, this is not a regional war. This is a war between Iran and the U.S. that is unfortunately spread in the region.
Okay, we're going to go to Tawhid Asadi, who is standing by for us in Tehran. And Tawhid, we know Israel warned of a new wave of strikes there in the capital. Can you just give us an update of what's happening there right now?
Well, I was out a short while ago driving through downtown, and I can say that the scene is dominated by 3 elements. The smoke that was drifting through the air, as well as the lingering echo of several explosions, and of course the concern and anxiety among some people who were rushing out of their houses at the time being. Also, we know that based on the latest reports, the complex related to the state TV IRIB was attacked. We saw thick smoke from the footages coming out of that complex, even though the head of IRIB came out to say that he doesn't have any update about the casualties, but we may expect casualties, seeing the scope and the sounds of explosions that we heard from the scene. Also, the latest update is that until the moment that we are speaking, the broadcasting of the channels related to IRIB is still ongoing. And of course, this is not just limited to that. Initial reports following the past 1 hour or so said that at least 8 points, 8 places in the Iranian capital were targeted, even though after those reports we heard continuous sounds of explosion, which means that there are several more points. And on that, we know that the former building of the Iranian parliament, not the current one, was also said to be targeted, as well as we've got other reports about a building belonging to the Expediency Council of the country in Mir Damad, which is said to be also attacked in Vali Asr Street, which is the longest street of the capital. There are several reports of explosions taking place as a sign